You found your way back here, to where the boundary between reality and nightmares blurs. Get comfortable, tonight's horror stories might just keep you up all night. It was December 31st, New Year's Eve. My friend Harry hired me to watch his dog, Bailey, for the weekend while he was out of town for the new year. I'm 34, he's 26, so I don't have that same urge to go out and party for New Year's Eve like he does. I was more okay with making some money and taking it easy for the night. New Year's Eve was on a Saturday. He left for the city early in the day. When I got there, he'd be back Sunday night. He left me with very basic instructions: just feed him and walk him twice a day, and keep him off the furniture. Bailey is a very small husky mix. I'm not sure what else she is, but she's about a third the size of a regular husky, and she's very quiet and well behaved. Hence why Harry was okay with me watching her instead of a dog sitter. I brought a backpack which contained my laptop, charger, toiletries, and a change of clothes for Sunday. Harry and I don't go way back. We met through mutual friends and had started going out occasionally on the weekends ever since. I would be sleeping in the spare bedroom of his house on the futon. Throughout the day, I just did stuff on my laptop and played some of Harry's video games. Later in the night, I invited my girl over with Harry's permission. His response was, "You better not in my bed," a way of jokingly saying yes, she can come over. She said she'd be getting out of work after 12, but then she'd come straight over. Harry's house is about half an hour from us, so my girl Ratty wouldn't be getting there until late. I had to kill the time alone with Bailey, watching movies until then. We were in the living room, and Bailey was by my feet. It was probably 9 p.m. when the doorbell rang. I went to answer the door, and it was a girl at the door. She looked about 30. She had a hoodie on and was holding a jacket. She introduced herself as Harry's girlfriend and said she left something here that she needed to grab. I offered to grab it if she wanted, and she said no, it's okay, she knew where it was in his room. I said okay, that's fine, and let her inside. She went straight upstairs to Harry's room and slightly closed the door behind her without latching it. I right away texted Harry, "I didn't know you had a girlfriend." She was in there for quite some time until she came back out, still holding her jacket. She came back down the stairs, thanked me, and was going straight for the door. I tried to stop her for a quick conversation, saying, "How long have you guys been dating?" And she said, "Too long," then laughed as if making a joke. I laughed too, and then she said, "Have a good night." I was a bit surprised by the interaction, but what I gathered from it was they had probably just recently broken up. Now I started to worry that maybe I shouldn't have let her in since Harry hadn't answered my text yet. I called him a few times before he picked up. He was out with his friends in a loud setting, so he could hardly hear me until he went outside to talk. I told him his girlfriend just came by to grab something, and he was completely bewildered at what I was saying. "Who are you talking about?" he said. I responded, "She said she was your girlfriend, I didn't get a name." He said in a yell, "You know I don't have a girlfriend." What did she look like? I started to feel really stupid just about now. I described the girl, and he said he had no idea who this could have been. I then proceeded to explain to him that she went upstairs to his room for a few minutes, then came back down. This was when he started freaking out. He told me to go up to his room now and check if she stole anything. Of course, I didn't know what was in his room beforehand, so he had me check for specific things, which all appeared to still be there. He tried hard to figure out who it could have been and said he'd call me back after he made some calls and sent me some pictures of different girls. Understandably, this was putting a damper on his night. I could tell he'd already been drinking, so I felt awfully stupid for letting some random girl into the house. He started sending me screenshots of different girls' Instagram accounts. None of them resembled the girl who came in. When I said no to all of them, he went silent for an hour. Then he texted me randomly, "I think I know who it was. Make sure she doesn't come back." I didn't ask any further questions. I responded, "Okay, my bad," and left it at that. Clearly, Harry was going through some serious girl drama, or so I thought. I watched the ball drop alone, not that I really cared about the new year or the ball drop at all. Later that night, Radif finally made it over, and so we hung out in the living room together. I told her what happened, and she was shocked. But then a freakish coincidence happened. Bailey lifted her head and looked at the front door, and then there was a knocking at the door. Whoever it was didn't ring the bell. There was no shot I was opening it. I called Harry a bunch of times, but he didn't pick up. He was wasted and didn't even feel his phone vibrating. Ratty and I stayed quiet, and eventually, whoever it was went away. I was honestly unnerved now. Surely it was in connection to whoever that girl was earlier. Maybe it was even her again. Either way, I didn't want to get involved any further in what was going on. After this, we decided to migrate to the spare bedroom where we'd stay for the night on the futon. We had a movie on as we laid down, and I held her. We fell asleep in this position and woke up at some unknown hour in the night, which I later found out was less than an hour after we fell asleep. I woke to Bailey's howling. She was in the room with us. Ratty woke up after me. Bailey was at the bedroom door, with her tail wagging, howling. I whispered, "Bailey, shush." She looked at me and then came over, but she stayed staring at the door, now growling, making unhappy whimpering sounds. Then there were footsteps outside on the wood floors. We heard what had to be at least 2 pairs of footsteps tiptoeing to the door, and then the doorknob twisted. By force of habit, we had the door locked, thankfully, and a girl's voice said, "Harry." I looked at Ratty and signaled for her to stay quiet. That girl was not alone. Another light tap at the door, and then the girl's voice said, "Who's in there? This is Harry's house." I made the decision to say in a loud voice, almost a yell, "The cops have been on their way for a few minutes now, just so you know." The girl said, "Who are you?" I didn't bite. I whispered to Ratty to actually call the police, and she did. The entire time she whispered into the phone. I said loud and clear, "I dare you to do something, because by the time you do it, the cops will be running through the front door." I heard a whisper on the other side of the door, then multiple pairs of footsteps walking away from the door. We stayed in the room waiting for the cops to get there. Since the front door was left wide open by those people, the cops came right in. The house was clear by this point. I gave my entire recount of the story and then called Harry multiple times until he finally picked up, still sounding pretty drunk. One cop talked with him on the phone for a few minutes while I sat with Ratty speaking with another cop. After all this was said and done, the accepted assumption was that there was a key in Harry's room taken by that girl from hours before. This was a pretty messy situation since Harry couldn't just come all the way home this late. He practically begged me to stay the rest of the night. I had Ratty go home. I stayed because I felt responsible for letting that girl in the first place. I stayed locked in that room the rest of the night with Bailey. I literally wedged a chair against the front door, some half-ass attempt at keeping them out if they decided to return. By morning, though, it seemed that they didn't return. Harry came back earlier that day than originally planned. I'm not going to air out any more private information to the internet than I already have, just in case anyone who knows him can figure out this story is about him. But he did tell me who he thought the girl was, and the story behind it proves that men have to be careful too with the women they choose to interact with. That girl and whoever was with her's intention of breaking in wasn't to steal anything evidently, which is the scariest part. He changed his locks ASAP. I can't even imagine staying in that house if I were him after this. However, it's been a year and as far as I know, nothing has happened unless he's keeping more to the story he told me a secret. The arrival of the new year, my husband and I returned to our apartment complex to turn in for the night. We both had a couple of drinks, but neither of us were intoxicated. As much as we enjoy partying with friends, when it comes down to it, we are really just homebodies. We lived in the corner penthouse suite of our complex. Although this was never confirmed, it was suspected the owners wanted to convert this apartment complex into condos. The rent certainly was not cheap, and access was limited to this floor. Upon entering the building, there is a walk-up to secure doors, and every now and then there would be a doorman to greet you as you entered or exited. There were also multiple security cameras placed throughout and around the building. It was an especially cold evening, and when we returned, there was no doorman present. It was late, at least 2:30 a.m. The foyer was empty, and one of the lights flickered softly. My husband and I entered the elevator and pressed the button to the top floor. The elevator ride was smooth, and as we ascended, I could feel myself becoming more relaxed, excited to finally be home and able to rest. My feet were killing me from wearing heels all night in the bitter cold. The bell chimed, signaling we had reached our floor. The door slid open, and we turned the corner to the left. Like I said, our suite was the corner suite at the end of the hall. However, something caught our eye. A woman, or what at least looked like a woman, was meandering through the hallway. Her hair was dark and scattered, it looked to be matted and covered her face. She wore a black lace dress that was torn and looked to be in bad shape. Thinking back, I don't even think she had any footwear on. We assumed she was intoxicated and was having difficulty finding her suite. Although on closer inspection, she didn't look familiar. We knew all of our neighbors, as, like I said, access was limited on this floor. I looked at my husband, who stood still as well. I could see he was contemplating the same thoughts. I asked him, should we ask if she needs help? He looked at me and said, just wait, maybe she's just drunk and having a hard time finding her suite. The woman just continued to slowly slide herself along the walls of the hallway, stopping at each door and peering through the exterior peepholes. Admittedly, this was creepy, but it just added to the theory that she was a drunk woman looking for her friends. She was humming, or what I believe was humming. The sound was something between a growl and a hum. We stood there in utter disbelief and awe. However, there was a veil of tension and uneasiness that lingered. The strange woman stumbled through the hallway, hunched over, until she pulled herself up to peer through the peephole. She eventually got to a suite of an elderly lady, whom I have a strong connection with. We'll just call her Evelyn. Evelyn was the sort of woman whose family had neglected her and rarely visited. She would bring my husband and me baked goods from time to time. I would bring her leftovers and assist her with groceries and medication. Frequently, Evelyn's smoke alarm would constantly go off. I would have to rush over and pull out the smoldering toast from her toaster and fan her smoke alarm until it stopped beeping. At times, a nuisance, but it would always turn into tea time. Nevertheless, I cared about Evelyn. So when I saw this strange woman peer into her peephole, I reacted. I blurted out, "Excuse me, are you all right?" I could feel myself lose confidence as I asked. The strange woman seemed to shudder for a moment and hunched over to the floor. She looked like she was about to puke or was frightened by my voice. My husband and I stepped closer, but the woman then let out a series of soft and menacing laughs, just barely audible. I have to admit, in this moment I was thoroughly creeped out and reached for my cell phone. It was uncomfortable because we couldn't get to our suite. Without having to walk right past this deranged woman, my husband said, "Hey, did you hear us? Do you need help?" Her laugh began to grow into what was a steady cackle. The strange woman then stood up. As she stood up, her cackle became a mixture between a cackle and a boisterous growl. She then stumbled forward and continued walking down the hall. There was a staircase just outside of our suite. I assumed she was making her way to the stairs, just too embarrassed to walk past us to the elevator. Maybe she was just a drunk woman, and this was nothing more than an uncomfortable standoff with a sad and intoxicated woman. I mean, if she was really that drunk, the stairs probably weren't a good idea. We were on the 7th floor. Nevertheless, I just didn't feel like it was worth the risk to engage with this woman. I just wanted to enter my suite and dive into bed. It was late, and my feet still hurt. As we took a few steps forward, the woman stopped, almost with laser precision. She stood up completely straight, looked right at our door, and then began to pound on our door, screaming bloody murder. I could feel myself becoming swallowed with fear. I reached for my cell phone and began to dial 911. The woman kept pounding on our door and screaming. To be honest, I'm surprised none of our neighbors came out to see what was happening. Part of me thinks they were too afraid themselves and were probably peering out of their peepholes. Afraid of what our neighbors would think, my husband said, "Hey, what are you doing? Stop that." And just like that, the strange woman stopped, fell to the ground, and began crawling quickly towards us. She looked up for a brief second. All I could see were her dark eyes. Her mouth seemed to be stained black, and she was growling again, but this time it was as if there was something in her throat that she was choking on. Frozen with fear, my husband and I just watched until she flashed us a menacing hiss, the kind you would hear in a movie but never imagined in real life. Terrified, I whipped off my shoes, and my husband and I ran towards the staircase on the other side of the building. We didn't want to risk waiting for the elevator and have her catching up. We went down 2 flights of stairs and stopped to listen if she was making her way down the stairs, but it was almost impossible to hear as my heart was pounding so hard. I thought to myself, what the hell was going on? We waited there for 10 minutes or so until eventually, we had the courage to head up the stairs and back to our suite. The woman was gone, and so we entered our suite. I was just relieved to finally be safe in my home. My husband sent a text to our landlord, and he replied that we would hear from him in the morning. I was so unbelievably exhausted but found it incredibly difficult to sleep. The sound of that woman's growling and cackling rang in my ears. I hardly slept. The next day, when my husband went to speak to the landlord, he asked him to check the security cameras. Although nothing turned up, the landlord said the cameras glitched due to the frigid temperatures last night. To this day, I still don't know what to think. That woman most certainly had problems. The question is, was she dangerous? We moved about a year later, but every New Year's Eve, I still think about that night. It was New Year's Eve of 2020, and all of us were ready for this horrible year to be over. My friend Michael was throwing a house party. I arrived early to help set things up. I secured a spot to sleep in his parents' room, meaning I could drive to the party and drink without having to worry about driving home. His parents obviously weren't home for the night. Most of our close friends in our friend group came, plus a bunch of Michael's friends who I didn't know. The party was fun. At midnight, everyone screamed "Happy New Year" and cheered their drinks. After that, people slowly started circulating out, and the party started to quiet down as people went to either other parties, bars, or home. The later the night got, the more it became just the closer friends staying behind, until it just turned into a chill drinking session in the living room. This went on late into the night. It was likely 2:40 a.m. when the last of everyone who wasn't sleeping at Michael's house was gone. As it quieted down, we started hearing this occasional sound. At first, we didn't know what it was, but it soon started to sound like a creaking sound. It was dismissed as a sound from the fridge or something at first, which I know sounds stupid, but house appliances often make weird noises. It was just Michael, me, and Lloyd. Lloyd was falling asleep on the couch already. It was reaching that time where we were just going to go to sleep. However, eventually, we got so bothered by the noise that we had to search. We went to the kitchen, and it wasn't coming from in there. We realized when we were close to the basement door that it was coming from downstairs. Michael opened the door, and we heard this creaking sound. "Go check what it is," I said. He kept saying, "No way." Then he called down into the basement, "Yo, who's down there?" The creaking stopped, and we never heard it again. After a solid minute of waiting at the top of the stairs, we agreed to go down together. We both grabbed knives, drunkenly thinking that was a good idea, when in reality, we were so drunk we'd probably only hurt ourselves with them. We got to the bottom of the stairs and looked through the entire basement. It's not huge, it just has a couch, TV, a bar, a table in the corner, and various old pieces of junk. It was pretty messy at the time. The first thing we did was search any possible crevice for someone who could be hiding. Then we tried to figure out what could have been making that sound. I noticed a rocking chair, and so I went up to it, sat in it, and then started rocking in it. It made the exact same creaking sound we had been hearing. Michael and I looked at each other. I stood up, and so did every hair on my body. I don't think we ever ran faster than we did when we ran up those stairs and slammed the door shut. We tried to come up with any logical explanation, but there was none. He kept the basement door locked for days until his parents came back. There was no living soul down there, but something was moving that rocking chair. That rocking chair used to belong to his grandma, who passed away forever ago, and it's just something his mom held on to for sentimental reasons. I can't say I've ever experienced anything resembling the paranormal before this, nor since then. It still sends chills down my spine. A couple of years ago, when I was in college, I went to a New Year's Eve party. For a little bit of background, I'm a female and lived on campus but went home for winter break. My parents' house was only about an hour away from campus, and I had a few friends who went back to school early. There was going to be a New Year's Eve party at one of my best friend's houses on campus, so I went back there for it. First, I went back to my college apartment and then arrived at my friend's on New Year's Eve at about 5 p.m. I was one of the first people there, and we just kind of hung out until the other people came over. For a long time, it was a lot of fun, and a lot of my college friends were there, but like many college parties that I went to, things soon became a little bit out of control. A lot more people started to show up at like 10 p.m. or so. The college that I went to is a very large university. I'm not sure how many people attended, but probably well over 25,000 or 30,000. The house soon had a lot of people that I didn't even recognize in it. I was still having a good time, though, until this one guy came up to me. He was a man who looked to be in his 29-year-old and had a tall, somewhat muscular build. Now, he wasn't jacked or anything, but he also wasn't fat, he was just big. He came right up to me, seeming drunk, and started asking me questions about myself. We talked, but not long into the conversation, he asked if I wanted to leave with him. I said no. He kept asking, and I soon walked away. It was very crowded, and the guy followed me all around just about wherever I went. By that point, it was probably midnight, and I decided to just leave. I walked through the crowd of people and found my friends. I told one of them about the guy who was following me, and then I said I would be leaving. I tried to point him out in the crowd, but at that point, I couldn't find him. Then I said bye to my friend, and I left. When I first got outside, I thought that the guy had finally given up. I didn't see him, and I was walking back to my apartment, which was only a few blocks away. But when I started to walk down the street, I heard somebody leaving the house and turned around to see the guy. He yelled at me, asking me where I was going. I told him that I was going home, and he started to walk towards me. Now I was concerned that he was going to follow me all the way back to my apartment. I tried to just ignore him and walk away and hope that he would stop, but he didn't. I heard him walking down the street after me, trying to catch up. I walked as fast as I could without running. When I made it to where I had to turn, he was still behind me. He was a long way back, so I tried to lose him. I cut through a random person's yard and then went through their backyard. Once I got through there, I cut into the next block over and then walked the other way down the street. This ended up working, and when I got off of that street, I no longer saw him. I was able to make it back to my apartment, and I even checked outside when I got back to make sure that he didn't somehow follow me. Everything was fine, and I went to bed shortly after. The next day, I went back to my parents' house because classes didn't start for college for about 2 more weeks. After driving back home, I arrived sometime in the early afternoon. It was then that I saw I was added on Snapchat by someone. It was a guy named Basil. I didn't automatically assume that it was the same guy from the night before. My college was so big, and I knew a lot of people and didn't have all their snaps. To be honest, I got added by people on almost a daily basis, plus I didn't even recall this guy telling me his name the night before. But after the guy added me on Snapchat, he said hi to me, and I asked him who he was. He responded, saying we met last night, remember? That's when I realized it was the same person. Still, I asked him to clarify. He said he was at the party and then described himself. When he did, I blocked him. I wanted nothing to do with this guy because, after all, he had tried to follow me home. After that, he did not contact me, but the story doesn't end there. That night, I was at my parents' house in my bedroom. I noticed out of my window a car parked on the side of the road out front. It was kind of weird because our neighborhood was quiet, and everybody's houses had long driveways with plenty of space to park. Plus, the car was parked like 20 feet from our driveway. It was a very typical looking sedan, but I couldn't see if anybody was inside or not because it was too far away. I decided to get up and walk over to the window to get a little bit better view. When I did, literally right when I got to the window, I saw the driver's door open. A man got out, and at first, I had no clue who it was. But then the guy came into our driveway and walked along the side of it. When he got a little bit closer, I realized it was the same guy. This really blew my mind. At first, I was not even near campus. I was at my parents' house an hour away. Why was he here? I watched him walk all the way up the driveway, but he didn't go into the front yard. Instead, he went around the side of the house and out of my view. It seemed as though he was going into the back. I hurried out of my room and found my parents. I told them about the guy, and then I called the police. We carefully went to a window in the back of the house and looked out to try to see the guy. It was really dark back there with many opportunities for places for him to hide. We didn't see him, but we knew that he was back there somewhere. For the next few minutes, he remained hidden. Then the police arrived. They came to the front door, and we let them know that the guy was probably hiding in the backyard. Our property was searched, and the man was located. He tried to run away, but was caught before making it off of our property. It turned out that the guy didn't even go to my college. He had found my location through the brief time that he had me on Snapchat because my location was on. This is an experience that is still almost unbelievable to me to this day. I feel lucky that I noticed the car and saw the man get out. If I didn't, I would not have known that it was his car or that he was hiding in the backyard. What he planned to do, I'm not sure, but I'm glad that we called the police. Each year when I was a kid, we would celebrate New Year's Eve and stay up late. Normally, I would go to bed at about 10 o'clock, but on New Year's Eve, I would stay up until around 2 a.m. My sister, my parents, and I would play board games and watch movies. We would then watch the ball drop when it was midnight and would stay up for several more hours. I think this happened when I was about 12 years old. That time, like any other, we played games and watched a couple of movies. This continued well past midnight, and at roughly 2 a.m., we all got tired and finally decided to go to bed. We could sleep in the next day because nobody had work or school. Our house was on a pretty quiet street. Other than that, it was a pretty typical neighborhood. I stayed up a little bit later than everybody else that night because I was watching a movie in the living room. When it ended, I finally went to bed. I remember getting back into my bedroom and turning out the lights. When I did, I could see very clearly into the front yard because of the moonlight. There was a woman standing in our yard. She was not facing me, and I didn't recognize her. I walked over to the window, and when I did, the woman turned and faced me. She saw me and then started to walk closer in my direction. This really creeped me out. Nobody was supposed to be in our front yard. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I moved away from the window and hid. I ducked down and laid on the floor so that she couldn't see me. My window was pretty large, and I did not have a cover on it at the time. Now, my bedroom was also on the second floor, so she couldn't directly reach me, but I was still terrified. I waited there, just hoping that she would go away. A few minutes went by, then I heard something hit my window. I wasn't sure as to what it was. I started watching my window, and something else hit it. The woman was throwing sticks at it. She was trying to get my attention, and I don't know why, but I got up. I carefully looked out of the window again. The woman was still there and looking right up at me, this time closer. She said something, but I couldn't hear her. Then I saw her motioning for me to let her inside. I was not going to do that. She then walked to the side of the yard near the front door. Then she knocked on the front door. I didn't move. I was hoping that my parents or sister would wake up. I didn't have the thought to call the police for some reason. It just never entered my mind. The woman knocked on the door on and off for like 5 minutes. Finally, she walked away. I watched her from the window walk to the end of the driveway and then a little ways down. She then got inside of a vehicle and drove off. The whole situation was really bizarre, and it really confused me. The next morning, I told my parents about it. They had no idea what she could have been doing either. Luckily though, she never came back. This happened just last year. It was New Year's Eve, and my wife and I were having friends over to our house. There were about 15 other people coming over, and we were going to have somewhat of a party. After everybody arrived, we had some food, and I talked with everyone. We played some games as well. My wife and I have a house that has about a 2-acre yard and is somewhat out in the country. At 12 o'clock, we all went outside and into the backyard behind the house to open champagne. Obviously, we didn't want to open it inside and have it spray all over the furniture, plus it wasn't that cold out. We stayed outside in the backyard for maybe a total of 10 minutes, then everybody went back in. All of our friends stayed until roughly 1 a.m. and then started leaving. By 1:30, everyone was gone. My wife and I cleaned up a bit and were very tired. I remember that my wife went upstairs to our bedroom, and I was finishing up loading the dishwasher downstairs in the kitchen. After I did so, I started to walk away, and I heard what I thought was my wife walking down the hallway. The hallway was out of my sight, it was kind of near the stairs, and I was around the corner from it. I called out my wife's name, wondering why she'd come back down, but she didn't answer me. I remember that I walked over there, which took me maybe 10 seconds. When I got there, I saw nothing. I was sort of confused, but I figured that my wife hadn't heard me calling for her and she just went back upstairs. I went upstairs and then got ready for bed. I didn't bother to ask her if she had just been downstairs or anything. So after I got ready, I turned out the lights and got in bed. Everything became silent, and that's when my wife asked me if I heard that. I hadn't heard anything. I sat up and asked her what she had heard, and she told me that it sounded like somebody was walking around downstairs. I listened closely, and then I sort of heard it. I walked over to the doorway and opened it up very quietly. Now I could hear much better, and somebody was definitely down there. They must have been who I had heard earlier. It really creeped me out, but then I heard the footsteps starting to walk up the stairs. I quickly closed the door back up and locked it. My wife already had her phone and was dialing 911. We then went into the bathroom connected to our bedroom, which also had a locking door on it. This would give us a little bit of extra space and safety. We were told that the police would be there within 10 minutes. As we were inside of the bathroom, we didn't really hear much. We were both trying to figure out who the person in the house was and how they had gotten in. Then out of nowhere, I heard somebody banging on our bedroom door. I did my best to try to ignore it. Hopefully, whoever was there would not be able to break through. This went on for quite some time though. At one point, it stopped, but then it picked back up again several minutes later. Finally, at last, the police arrived. When they did, they entered the house, and I heard them yelling from downstairs. I really couldn't hear what they were saying though. We did not leave the bathroom because it wasn't safe to come out yet. We heard yelling on and off for the next 10 minutes. Finally, we heard police officers' voices, and we were told that it was safe. The person inside of our house was a man who we didn't know. He was caught and had snuck into the house after we all went outside. Then he hid until we were going to go to bed. When the police got there, he threatened them and claimed to have a weapon, even though he didn't. Eventually, they were able to get him to come downstairs. I think the guy was on drugs or something. He did mess up our house a little bit, but I'm glad that everyone was okay. I still can't believe that while our friends and us were inside, the guy was hiding in our house somewhere. That was the craziest New Year's Eve ever. When I was 12, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up and from there, they divorced. My mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this didn't worry me as this was not the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying that they had gone to Florida for a few days and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was habitually leaving me alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. We lived on a relatively quiet road surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town. I knew most of the people, if not by name then by face, enough to wave and have a small chat with. I had never been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, I was staying up late watching television. I remember I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on the USA channel, and I had most of the lights on in the house. Not because I was afraid, but because at 12, I wasn't concerned with the electricity bills or even saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected within my little bubble of home. As I was watching the movie, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking it was probably the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party or people over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out and that it would come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen where the back door is. My heart started racing in my chest because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off of the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen and leads directly into the living room where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off of the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started, as slowly and as quietly as I could, to make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman from playing hide and seek in the dark many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything, it was just like they were moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the doorway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream, however, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and I ran down the hallway. I believe the only reason I wasn't grabbed by now is because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children would do when they're afraid. I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and I ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time as it was right off the side of the couch. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you can easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked and the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it certainly wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking and on the verge of tears when the person started laughing. That after he had stopped, though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure. I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. It was also several feet off the ground as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed, terrified, for what felt like hours. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what had happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why. Scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there, I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out this kind of window was a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully as I was not, and still am not, the most coordinated person. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house. That's when I noticed that the back door was wide open. Scared but feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of pitch black night, I walked back up the steps and started peering inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, meaning no terrifying man leering at me basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe at how stupid this could have turned out, and I wish I would have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go get help. But thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under beds, behind the couch, and anywhere I thought even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mom's bedroom so I could check it, and then relocked it afterward. When I was positive there was no one there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and I noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, and checked all the windows and front door. Then I called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker, who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on. This past New Year's Eve, I went away for the night with my two best friends and one of their moms. I was home for the holidays from college, and my friend Yarezi invited me to go to Palm Springs to celebrate New Year's with her mom and our friend Nadia. I didn't have any other plans, so I decided to go with them. We went to a cool city about an hour from where we live that is big on shopping and resorts. We planned to have a pretty calm night, watch the ball drop at a block party downtown, and have a few drinks at the bar. Since we're on the West Coast, the ball drop is at 9:30, so at around 8:30, we ventured from our hotel, walking to the block party about a mile away. On the way, we passed by a very lively bar. We decided to stop by and we spent 15 minutes dancing, but we didn't get any drinks. It was a gay bar, and Yarezi and Nadia, being gay, were stoked on it and wanted to come back after the ball drop, even though it was about 90% men there. We continued on to the block party to get some dinner and a glass of champagne. The ball finally dropped and they had a DJ, so we spent about an hour there just dancing. After we got tired of it, we decided to head back to the bar and hang out there until midnight. Once we got there, Yareza's mom paid for a drink for each of us, but left soon after that because she was tired. It's about 10:30 at this point, and Yarezi, Nadia, and I are enjoying our drinks and having fun dancing. Nadia tried some of my drink since it was one she hadn't had before. I constantly have my guard up when drinking in public, and I felt safe at this bar because it was 90% gay men who I thought would not have an interest in me. I went back to the bar to get a second drink, and that's the last thing I remember. The rest I've gathered from Yarezi and Nadia. Almost immediately after getting my second drink, I asked Nadia to go to the bathroom with me because I wasn't feeling well, even though I was completely fine 10 minutes before. Once in the bathroom, I just collapsed on the floor and was almost unresponsive. Nadia, now worried, somehow dragged my lifeless body out to where Yarezi was waiting for us. Security, seeing my condition and assuming I was wasted, asked us to leave. Yarezi and Nadia decided to take me back to the hotel about half a mile away. By this point, I was unconscious, and there were barely sounds escaping from my mouth. They saw someone leave the bar at the same time as us who was walking near us, but they were preoccupied with trying to keep my lifeless body off the ground. At one point, I threw up all over myself, them, and the sidewalk. The next part of the story we had to get from Yarezi because Nadia doesn't have much memory of this. Still struggling to carry me, the man they saw leave the bar approached them. He was hitting on Nadia, trying to get her to grab a drink with him. She was very agitated and told him to leave, saying her friend needed help right now. He didn't take no for an answer and continued to follow us down the street, asking if we wanted to get drinks with him and if he could help carry me and such. A middle-aged woman witnessing this came up and told the man off, saying something along the lines of, "Stop harassing these young women or I'm going to call the police." Thankfully, he left after that. Next, by some miracle, an EMT and his wife, enjoying the holiday, ran into us on the street. He checked me out to make sure something wasn't majorly wrong and then carried me the rest of the way to my motel and into the room since my friends could barely hold me up. They thanked him profusely, and him and his wife left. This is where Nadio's memory kicks back in a little bit. 5 minutes later, they get a knock on the door, and it's the EMT and his wife again. They came to let us know that a man followed us to the hotel, and they just saw him hop the gate and start to make his way to our room. My friends called hotel security, but they were unable to find him. My friends didn't get a glimpse of him, but I'm sure it was the same man from earlier. I spent the rest of the night vomiting everything in my body and dry heaving. After that, I woke up the next morning in a pile of pillows and blankets on the bathroom floor. My last memory was at the bar getting a second drink, and my friends filled me in on everything that happened. Feeling like crap, I thought I must have drunk way too much, but I've never blacked out before in my life, and the amount of drinks I had, only 2 in 2 hours, since I didn't get to my second at the bar, didn't add up to me being completely unconscious. We all decided that my first drink had to have been drugged since Nadia had some of it and had no memory of our walk even though she was fully functional. I'm sure that the man that was talking to Nadia and then followed us back was the one that slipped something in my drink. To this day, I don't really know how I could have been slipped something because I got my drink from the bar and never set it down. My best guess was that it was already in the cup. Thankfully, I had a good friend and kind strangers protecting me that night. It keeps me up at night thinking about what could have happened under different circumstances. A few years ago, when I was 18, I was coming home from watching the fireworks display on New Year's Eve. It was 3 a.m. when I reached my safe, family-friendly, nothing ever happens neighborhood. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and live in a posher and wealthier area. My friends wanted to call a taxi because we didn't want to wake our poor parents at this hour to drive us back home, but because of my stubbornness and insistence, we ended up taking the very long walk home. My friend Kieran was complaining most of the time. I guess I can't blame him. Bevis was just silent and compliant, and I was cheerful. When we reached almost my street, we split ways. The guys went on their very long walk home, which was way longer than mine, and I continued on mine. When I passed a little cake shop, I noticed a guy across the street. I only looked at him briefly, but something in the way he quickly looked up at me, almost with interest, caught my attention. I hurried on anyway because I'm usually paranoid about things, and 99% of the time, it's just me being paranoid. I turned onto my street, which was much darker than I had anticipated. This was about 3:15 a.m., mind you. As I passed the bowling club, I kept looking behind me just to make sure. It was getting quite cold and dark, so I started feeling creeped out, but there was no one behind me, no one anywhere as far as I could see. I was halfway down my street where the road dips down when I noticed something on the path in front of me. I couldn't tell what it was, and at the last minute, I stepped off the path onto the road to avoid it because it looked like it might be a dead animal. As I stepped onto the road, I turned slightly and saw that there was someone behind me. They weren't too close, but they weren't too far away either, and I remember my heart leaping into my throat because I hadn't seen them before, and for them to have gotten that close in that short space of time, something about it didn't sit well with me. When I told people about this later, they said that I should have been quite suspicious then. It was 3 a.m. in the morning, and you're quietly walking behind a girl, not even bothering to keep a safe distance. Like, if you're really innocent, you would take measures to emphasize that, right? I couldn't see who it was, nor could I tell if it was male or female because it was just a black figure to me. It was a very brief glimpse. I was scared, though, so I whipped out my phone and started to call Kieran. I kept calling him, but silly Vodafone couldn't connect to him. So I tried to call Bevis, but he wouldn't pick up. I kept this up at least 5 times, getting increasingly anxious but daring not to look behind me to see if he was still there. I'm glad I didn't actually. I think I would have really freaked out if I had confirmed it. By that time, I'd reached my driveway, and I hurried up it thinking I was safe. But as I was halfway up, I looked over my shoulder again, just really quickly, and I saw the figure there again. The way I explained this next bit is going to be hard because I was really confused and muddled. On one hand, it may have looked like he was merely passing my driveway, but on the other hand, I am much more certain that it looked like he was just about to step onto the driveway as if to walk up. At that precise moment that I thought that, it occurred to me that he might be my brother Hubert because no one else would bother walking up my driveway. Even if some guy was following me, it never occurred to me that he would really go to the lengths of going up my driveway as well. I thought I was completely safe because I had the advantage of having my house close by when he started following me. However, something about the build of this figure didn't seem like Hubert to me, so I hurried on anyway. My beautiful, wonderful, amazing mother had stayed up to wait for me, and I'm so glad because she opened the door for me as soon as I knocked. I hate to imagine what would have happened if I'd had to wait for a while. I went inside, but I left the second door open and the outside light on because I thought Hubert might be coming in any second now. But Mom was like, "You can turn them off. Your brother came back 2 hours ago." I did get a little bit creeped out, but I just dismissed the thought because we are so quick to always think we're safe. I closed the door, shut off the light, and went to get a drink of water, and Mom went to bed. I went to my room to grab my clothes and then went to the bathroom to take a shower. I switched off the living room lights. This is sort of funny now that I think about it. Before I took a shower, I replied back to a message from Kieran, who was asking if I was home safe yet. I demanded to know why he hadn't picked up his phone and then told him I was creeped out for a few minutes, but I was okay now. As I showered, I actually thought about that figure. I wasn't too convinced that it was following me, but my mind did teeter into wondering this or that. In any case, I remember thinking that it was okay because I was safe now. Near the end of my shower, I heard something at the window. It didn't sound like the usual creaking or bumping of an old house. The way I described it to other people was like the sound of someone resting their hands against the window to steady themselves. It sounded really unnatural. I know because it caught my attention straight away, and I immediately jumped to the possibility that there might be someone outside. I know that only a really strange sound would make me do what I did next, which was to turn off the water and crouch under the window, hiding and waiting. I waited for quite some time, too scared to move for a few minutes, but there was nothing. So I gingerly crawled out, still too scared to stand up properly, and I switched off the bathroom lights. But then it was impossible for me to dry myself and dress myself, so I turned on the heater light, which is much smaller and dimmer. As I did that, I noticed that there was a very small blue light there that certainly didn't belong there. The way I can describe it now, it was almost like a keypad of a phone lit up. I was scared, but I switched off the heater light as well and backed into the corner, my towel wrapped around me, and I waited. It seemed like a long time that I waited, too scared to unlock the door and move because I knew it would make a lot of noise. As I waited in the pitch darkness, several blue lights came on outside the window. A few became very bright, and they were moving, trying to shine through the window. Now that I think about it, it had to be a phone, but I'm not sure because there were a few lights. But that did it for me because I practically bolted for my mom. I unlocked the door and went into my parents' room, trembling like a leaf and gibbering that there was someone outside the bathroom window. I was clearly very upset, so Mom ushered me around, trying to find a safe room for me to change into. Dad apparently heard the footsteps hurrying back down the driveway, and I'm glad he did because the situation feels so surreal to me now that I'm not even sure if it really happened. Maybe I imagined it all, but this is confirmation that it wasn't just my imagination. I was so shaky, and I slid into bed and couldn't sleep until morning. Even when it was morning, I was terrified, especially when I heard Dad leave the house and go into the backyard. That was the lesson I learned. I'm never walking home again at night. I'm even a bit worried during the daytime now. We never did find out who it was. People wonder if it was the same person I passed earlier, but for some reason, I didn't think so. My brother doesn't think so either. This past New Year's was my and my boyfriend's 4-year anniversary. We typically don't do much, so this year, we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. At the time, the two of us were living in Seattle, and we wanted to rent a cabin in a snowy small town for the weekend. We found a cabin on Airbnb with a hot tub, and we were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. To get to it, you had to drive down a small remote private road that ended in a roundabout. Off the roundabout was a long uphill driveway leading up to our cabin. We got to the cabin, and it was snowy and beautiful. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage, and you needed to take stairs on the back side of the property to get to the front door. When we got inside, there was a booklet with all the cabin's info outlined. The book said that during the snowy season, don't be surprised if their contracted snow plowers showed up to clear off the driveway. Okay, sounds good. So we unpacked and realized that there was no service on either of our phones, but the booklet told us that there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire, playing board games and drinking wine. The weekend was exactly what we needed. We planned to spend the next day in town, and that night I had booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed up to enjoy some good food. Dinner was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne and hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature had dropped, and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of powder. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. At that point, my boyfriend stopped the car, headlights shining in front, and asked if I noticed the new tire tracks. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard the new tire tracks, but there they were. Immediately, we remembered that the snow plowers could have stopped by, but the issue was we saw the tire tracks because of the snow, and who plows in the dark. We also knew that once we were at the cabin, we had no service on our cell phones. So we figured we would head back into town and message our Airbnb host and ask if they or any of their friends had stopped by. We waited for a while in town for a reply from our host, but we didn't hear back. We could have called, but at that point, it was past 10, and we didn't want to be bad guests. We figured we blew the whole thing out of proportion and might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I am big into true crime and spooky subreddits and horror movies, so I was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back. This time, we actually drove up the driveway towards the top of the hill. Part of the driveway, though, I noticed something. My stomach dropped as I noticed footprints on the property. We backed down the driveway and took a closer look to see if there were any more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had driven up the driveway, then reversed down, parked, and then got out of the car and walked all around the property. The property was quite large, with tons of trees and brush, and we knew that these footprints could go anywhere. The moment we saw the footprints, we decided to call the police. We figured it was better safe than sorry, and we would just have the officer go onto the property with us to check everything out. We drove down the road till we got service, called the police, and waited for their arrival. The policeman showed up, and we followed him onto the property. The officer scanned the property and determined there was no one out there. Obviously, we were a little bit shaken up and very embarrassed. We thanked the officer as he left. Needless to say, neither of us wanted to sit in a hot tub in the dark woods after what had happened. Instead, we locked the doors and watched a movie with champagne. We were both tired from the day and passed out pretty quickly. At 2 a.m., we both woke up on the couch with the TV on and all the lights laughing about how the night didn't turn out as planned. As my boyfriend went to brush his teeth, we heard a noise. It sounded mechanical and only lasted a few seconds. We looked at each other and froze. The garage door. There are very few reasons that someone would need to open the garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 2 o'clock in the morning. Like I said, we woke up with all of the lights on, and the cabin had lots of windows. We knew that if someone was outside, they knew that we were here and that they could see us. I immediately grabbed the landline and dialed 911. Once again, we sat crouched in the Airbnb, praying for the police to arrive. We knew that whoever had made those tracks was still on the property, and this time they were making noise. As I sat talking to the operator, we heard a bang on our balcony as if someone was throwing something up onto it. I was losing my absolute mind when the operator told me the police were nearby. All of a sudden, they were there. We saw the police lights and watched them search everything. Then, soon, we heard banging on the door. It was the police, and we were okay now. At the door were two policemen, one in front of us and one a little behind, kind of kicking around the snow and looking at the ground. I immediately noticed the police officer in the back as the officer who did the initial check on the property. The officer told us that not only was the garage door shut, but it was locked, and again, there were no signs of someone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the officer said the road conditions were too dangerous at that time of night. I looked at the officer who had to come out to the property twice, and I felt I had deeply disappointed him. My boyfriend and I went back inside, locking all the doors again, and we tried to sleep. The next day, we were leaving. While we survived the night, I didn't feel right in the cabin anymore. It was forever the spooky cabin in my head, and I just wanted to leave. As we packed, we heard the same noise that we heard at 2 a.m. That's when I had the realization that it was the heater all that time. It was just the heater in the garage making this noise. My boyfriend looked at me and immediately said, "You need to give up your murder shows," and then walked away. As for the banging on the balcony, it was just a perfectly timed fall of a pine cone. I promise I'm not paranoid. I think back on this story a lot and I'm embarrassed about how little came of it, but also incredibly grateful for the same reason. Tale takes us deep into the darkest corners of the internet, where whispers of accursed games spread like wildfire through online forums and chat rooms. They called it the Grimoire, a text-based role-playing game shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors of misfortune and despair. Legend had it that the game was the creation of a reclusive programmer, a digital recluse who had poured his darkest fears and obsessions into its code. But something went wrong. The game, once intended as harmless entertainment, became corrupted, twisted by an unknown force, its code taking on a life of its own. Rumors spread like wildfire through the online gaming community, tales of players experiencing strange phenomena, their real lives mirroring the events of the game with chilling accuracy. Some claimed to have lost fortunes, their in-game losses translating into real-world financial ruin. Others whispered of broken relationships, accidents, even disappearances, all linked to the game's malevolent influence. The game, it seemed, had a way of reaching out from the screen, of blurring the lines between the virtual and the real with terrifying consequences. Despite the chilling tales, curiosity got the better of many, drawn to the game's mystique like moths to a flame. Among them were two friends, Mark and Lucas, avid gamers with a penchant for the strange and unusual. They stumbled upon the grimoire on a hidden forum, its download link buried beneath layers of cryptic messages and warnings. Intrigued and perhaps a little foolish, they decided to download the game, eager to experience its mysteries firsthand. As they installed the game, a sense of unease settled over them, the computer screen flickering erratically, the room growing noticeably colder. Ignoring the warning signs, they launched the game, its opening screen a jumble of distorted text and disturbing imagery that seemed to writhe and pulsate before their eyes. A single line of text appeared on the screen, its message chilling in its simplicity: "Welcome to the grimoire. You have been warned." Undeterred, Mark and Lucas created their characters, their avatars appearing on the screen as pixelated representations of themselves, their features strangely distorted, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The game world was a dark and unforgiving place, a labyrinth of shadowy forests and crumbling ruins populated by grotesque creatures and malevolent entities. As they progressed through the game, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, their every move scrutinized by an unseen presence. Strange things began to happen. This is something that happened to me when I was much younger. I believe I was about 11 or 12 during this time. I lived at home with my older brother and my parents. One of my favorite things to do after school most days was to unwind by playing some video games. I would go upstairs to my bedroom and start playing on my PlayStation 2 for a while. Sometimes, I would play all the way until it was time for dinner. So, one day I got home from school and went straight up to my bedroom to play some video games. Both my parents were still at work, and my brother was still at school. That's how things usually were for an hour or two after I got back on most days. I remember playing video games, and a little while in, I heard my brother getting home downstairs. The front door opened and closed, and I heard him walk inside. I thought nothing of it and I kept gaming. But about an hour later, I got a call from my mom. I had a home phone in my bedroom and saw through the caller ID that it was my mom's cell phone. When I answered, she told me that she was on her way to pick up my brother from his friend's house, and they would be home soon. My dad was going to pick up some food on the way home from work, and she wanted to know what I wanted. I told her whatever food it was that I was in the mood for that night. Then we said bye, and I hung up. It was only after ending the call that I realized it was strange that my brother was not home. If he was at a friend's house, then who had I heard entering our house? My heart started racing, and I had a terrible feeling. I carefully walked to my bedroom door and opened it up. I had never heard the person walking upstairs or near my bedroom. I didn't know where they went after entering the house. So, after not hearing or seeing anything, I left my bedroom. I quietly walked down the hallway and looked downstairs. I still saw nothing. Then I went down the stairs. Once there, I walked around the main level of the house looking. I did not see anybody, but when I was near the kitchen and kind of the front door, I heard a noise coming from the basement. It sounded like somebody was down there. I quickly ran away and went back upstairs to my bedroom. A short time after entering my room, I heard the front door to the house open and close again. At that point, I ran back downstairs. When I got to the front door, I saw what looked like a man walking away down the street. I didn't recognize him and only saw him for like 2 seconds. It might not have been the same guy who had been in the house, but I think it was. I then locked all the doors and called my parents, who then called the police. The door had been left unlocked for when my brother got home. I hadn't known he was going to a friend's house. Looking back, I can't believe it happened. I didn't even know I was home alone with some random guy downstairs. I'm really glad that he didn't go near my bedroom. This happened when I was like 16 and in my heavy gaming phase, still living with my parents. I played a lot of League of Legends in my room on my computer in those days, especially in the summertime when it's so unbearably hot outside and I preferred to stay inside in the air conditioning. Anyway, way back when I lived at home, I'd have the place to myself a lot because my parents traveled a lot and I was the last one to move out. If I recall correctly, this was on a Friday night or a night that school was out the next day because I was staying up late. After I got home from school, I submitted a paper that was due that night to get it over with. Then, I had to do some shopping afterward on my mom's orders since they'd be gone for a while. It was how I earned my keep in the house, according to my dad. They left cash for me to use. I always had to show them the receipt though so that I wouldn't just pocket any of the money. My mom gave me a shopping list, so I went to Whole Foods in my old Camry, my first car. Shopping took about an hour. While in the grocery store, this guy in line behind me started talking to me, and I don't know why. He made a comment about one of the things I was buying and just wouldn't stop, even as I was bagging my groceries. He kept talking to me, which I found weird. He wasn't paying attention to anyone else. I was still nice though. When it was time to leave, I said, "Have a good one," and left. I went out to my car in the parking lot, packed the trunk, then headed home. It was a scorching hot day as we were in early June. I wasn't looking to go out and do anything outside. Once I was done with everything I needed to do, it was dark out by now, so I got right on League of Legends on my computer and texted my friend David to get on as well. He joined my party, and we played some dual rank as we always did. I was using my noise-canceling headset. We were committed already to playing League of Legends all night and ranking up, so of course, I needed to take a break to make dinner at some point. Probably 2 hours into playing, I told David I was going to eat dinner and I'd probably be back on in an hour. He said he'd be back on later too. So with that, I took a break and made some pasta for dinner. The kitchen is downstairs and my room is upstairs. While I was sitting in the kitchen eating, I knew for sure I heard a thump from upstairs. Did it sound like a footstep? I wasn't sure. It could have been any number of things, but the last thing I'd imagine it would be was a footstep. I did, however, go and lock the front door. Now, oftentimes for a while, I would leave the door unlocked just because my parents' house is in a good side of town, and I just never took the idea of a break-in seriously. It's something you hear about on the news, but don't think it'll ever happen to you. I went upstairs, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I said my brother Tristan's name into the hallway. I knew he wasn't supposed to be here, but I don't know. I heard a sound and I felt the urge to see if anyone was here. When no one answered back, I went back to my room and got back on League of Legends. I put my headset back on and texted David that I'm going back on. Shortly after, he came back on. We started playing again. A couple of games in, I looked to my left at the doorway of my room into the hallway. I don't know if something in my peripheral vision or some other sense felt something there, but I would leave the door open when I was home alone as my mom would tell me to. The hallway was dark except for the one little nightlight plugged into an outlet. My room shone blue from my wall lights. Some of the blue poured into the part of the hallway closest to my room. In between the crack of the door was total blackness. I couldn't see through it. I didn't think anything of it. After our next game, David said he was taking a leak and walked away. While we were in the lobby, I looked at my phone, then looked back out to the hallway, and I noticed something was different. Now I could see through the crack of the door into the hallway. My first thought was someone blocking it just minutes ago? By instinct, I spun my chair around to face the bed behind me, and there was a man sitting on my bed with his freakishly upright posture and his hands resting on his thighs. He almost looked to be smiling. I was so alarmed I jumped out of my seat onto the desk and crawled onto the desk, causing my monitor and basically everything else to fall off of it. I screamed, "What do you want?" And he started to actually smile now, showing his teeth like he was laughing. I ran out of the room into the hallway. I stopped halfway down the hallway and looked back at my bedroom door. I heard the springs of my bed lifting, and then the guy slowly walked into the doorway and stopped. He stood there. I once again yelled, "What do you want?" He then spoke in a stuttered, slow voice, asking if he could play too. I asked, "How did you get in here?" He stepped a few steps forward and pointed down the stairs. I assumed he was implying he entered through the front door. I was at a loss for what to do, so I ran down the stairs to the landline phone, as my cell phone was still in my room. I grabbed the phone and a kitchen knife and screamed, "You need to leave. I'm calling 911. I heard footsteps walking down the steps, and the last time I saw the guy was when he walked past the kitchen, looked at me, and then I heard him walking out the front door. I ran to slam it shut and lock it. For the first time ever, I was ashamed of myself for leaving the door completely unlocked. I held the phone for a few minutes, deciding whether to tell my parents. Ultimately, I did. My mom was concerned at first, then grew livid, so much so to the point that she put my dad on the phone. He told me to go through the house and make sure nothing was taken. I went through every room, and honestly, everything seemed in place. I said the man seemed like something was off about him. The man didn't seem overtly hostile, but something was wrong with him, and I don't know what his intention was. The image of him sitting on my bed and the realization that he was watching me through the crack in the door was haunting enough. This is a story I'm not proud of, mostly for my naivety. When I was in middle school and early high school, I didn't know how to talk to girls at all at school, but that's a lot of boys in middle school. I wasn't shy in general. I had friends and did normal things an 8th grader would do. I just had never kissed a girl or anything. Some of my friends at the time claimed they had already gone further than that with girls, and I was starting to feel pressure. But I was still having trouble approaching girls in that way. The mentality went from boys making fun of girls to suddenly liking them in a matter of like a year. I was a pretty big gamer in middle school and early high school. This was when I was in 8th grade. I was like 13. My voice was still probably a bit prepubescent sounding. It was 2009. I played a lot of console games and computer MMORPG games. My favorite console games at the time were GTA 4 and Call of Duty, and my favorite computer game was this MMORPG called Ganu. It was this online game where you would level up by killing monsters, and the more you leveled up, the higher level monsters and hunting grounds you'd be able to tackle. The online community in this game was very active, and there were tons of players. My older brother used to play it a little bit too. I played it more for sure though. I was in a guild and town and everything. I don't remember how it happened, but I befriended this female player who was a higher level than me. Her username was Pokimane. Anytime I'd sign in and she was on, she'd message me and vice versa. We would join parties together, which meant we'd share EXP on whatever monsters we killed, and we just chatted for hours. She knew a lot about me, including my age and my town, and some personal family details she would open up to me too. Eventually, she told me her name was Karina. It was weird feeling such a connection with a girl when really, I knew nothing about her appearance or her voice. It truly was like having a pen pal, but better. It was interesting enough that we both lived in Texas state. She lived about an hour from me. After a few weeks, or maybe even a month, we started talking about maybe meeting one day. To do this, though, we'd have to exchange numbers. At the time, I didn't actually have a cell phone yet. I only had an iPod Touch. However, I was able to download a texting app that allowed me to send messages to people with cell phones. Through this app, I was able to send her a picture of myself. It was definitely this cringy 8th grade boy selfie of me trying to look good looking. She called me cute, and then she sent back a picture of herself. She looked a couple of years older than me, like 15, which was the age she told me she was. Based on the picture, I found her very attractive. This was around the time our messages became more flirtatious and romantic. But we were both minors, so neither of us could just drive an hour away. However, she apparently had a solution for this. She told me her sister had friends that lived around me, and she could probably get a ride to me. This was exciting news for my little 13-year-old self. I wanted to wait for a day and night when my parents wouldn't be home, so I'd have the house to myself. This was about a week later, I believe. My parents were going to the Hamptons for the whole weekend, so it would just be my brother and me home. My brother was 18, so I asked him to please just go out for the night with friends so that I could be alone with Karina. I gave Karina my address and told her to come that Saturday whenever she wanted. She said she'd be coming a little later, like at night. She didn't give me an exact time. At that point, we still had never spoken on the phone. I still hadn't heard her voice. I was so nervous all day that I couldn't even play video games. I was busy cleaning my room, making things look cool, fixing my appearance, and even rehearsing things to say in the initial moments of meeting. Then I got a message from Karina saying she's here. I sprang up and ran to the front door. I looked through the peephole and didn't see anyone. She then said, "You can come out to the front door." I opened the door and stepped onto the front porch. I looked around, and the street was dark and quiet, no cars, no people. I went back inside and shut the door. I messaged her back saying, "I don't see you." She replied, "Oh, I must have the wrong house. Give me a minute." That was a bit weird. I locked the door and sat on the living room couch, nervously waiting and playing games on my iPod. I got a message from her again. She said she's here and to come outside. I replied, "Ring the bell so I know you're at the right house." Then the doorbell rang. My nerves really set in. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and didn't see anyone. I said, "Karina." Through the peephole, I saw a hand reach towards the door and knock. I said, "Karina," again as I kept looking through the peephole. Everything felt like it instantly crumbled on top of me as this bald, creepy-looking short guy stepped in front of the peephole and then said through the door, "Hey, it's Pokemon. I want to talk." I ran away from the door with my hands over my mouth, truly speechless. The person I'd been talking to all this time was a creepy grown man. I was disgusted and scared. I went to call my brother's cell phone. He didn't pick up. The doorbell kept ringing. I went to my bedroom and locked myself in. I held the house phone in my grasp, considering calling my parents but too embarrassed to do so. My room was the only other room in the house with the lights on. I have a big window in my room that overlooks the whole side yard of our corner house. I turned off my lamp and slightly kinked the blind just a crack, and I saw that guy on the other side trying to look in. He started to knock on the window and said through the closed window how much of a connection we clearly have and that we could at least be friends. I responded with nothing. I called my brother again, and he picked up this time. I said, "Please come home right now." The Karina person was a grown man the entire time, and he's at my window right now. My brother's always been pretty big, even as a teenager. I'd feel safer with him being here. He said he was coming home with his friends right now. We stayed on the phone so I could tell him if anything happened. I ran to my parents' bedroom upstairs and hid there. The man was blowing up my message app, saying he would like to talk and that there was a reason he had to lie about who he was. When my brother got home, he told me he saw the guy outside. My brother and his 3 friends confronted the creepy short man outside. I went outside then to watch the 4 of them intimidate the man, calling him a sicko. The man's defense was that he was concerned for my well-being, inviting strangers from online over, and that this was supposed to be a learning lesson. I refuted this claim by asking him why he would say that we could be good friends at my window when my brother and his friends started pushing the man. He started quickly walking to his car. My brother kicked the guy's tail light while one of his friends threw a rock at his window. He sped off down the road, never to be seen again. This was humiliating and disturbing, but at the same time, I was really grateful for my brother and his friends coming to my aid. They potentially saved me from a seriously sick creep breaking into the house. It's still painful and uncomfortable realizing all that time I spent opening up to who I thought was a girl my own age on a game was some creepy grown man with a different agenda. Our first story begins on a Friday night, the air thick with anticipation. A young man named Jack, an avid gamer, scoured online marketplaces for a deal on a used console, eager to dive into the latest releases. He stumbled upon an offer that seemed too good to be true, a current-gen console, practically brand new, being sold at a fraction of the retail price. The seller, only identified as KL, was vague in his responses, claiming he simply needed to get rid of it. Despite a prickle of unease, Jack dismissed his better judgment and arranged to meet KL at a dimly lit gas station later that evening. The seller, a gaunt man with nervous eyes, arrived in a beat-up car, the console hastily wrapped in a garbage bag. He practically shoved it into Jack's hands, eager to be rid of the device. Jack, his excitement overriding his apprehension, paid the man and hurried home, eager to boot up his new purchase. As he connected the console to his TV, he noticed an unsettling detail he had overlooked in his haste, a single deep scratch etched across the top of the console, almost resembling a cryptic symbol. Brushing it off as nothing more than cosmetic damage, Jack grabbed his controller and prepared to enter a world of digital entertainment. From the moment he pressed the power button, things felt off. The console whirred to life with an unnatural hum, the fan noise louder and more erratic than it should have been. The screen flickered, displaying distorted images and garbled text before snapping into focus, revealing the console's home screen. But something was different. The usual cheerful background was replaced with a static image of a dark, desolate forest, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Jack chalked it up to a corrupted hard drive, a minor inconvenience he could easily fix with a factory reset. As he navigated the console's menu, he noticed strange glitches, the cursor moving on its own, selecting options he hadn't chosen. The console seemed to have a mind of its own, its actions becoming increasingly erratic and unsettling. Unease curdled in his stomach, but Jack, determined to make his new purchase work, continued to tinker with the settings, attempting to restore the console to its factory settings. His efforts were met with resistance, the console seemingly fighting back, the screen flashing with disturbing imagery, grotesque figures with hollow eyes and gaping maws flickering in and out of existence. Cold dread washed over Jack as he realized that this was no ordinary glitch. Our next tale takes us back to the neon-lit golden age of arcades, a time when joystick warriors battled it out for high scores and bragging rights. In the bustling heart of the city, nestled between a dingy pizzeria and a flickering neon sign promising adult entertainment, stood the Pixel Palace, a haven for gamers seeking an escape from reality. Among the flashing lights and the cacophony of blips and bleeps stood a machine unlike any other, its faded paint and flickering screen whispering tales of a bygone era. This was Dark Carnival, a game shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors, said to be haunted by the spirit of a former player. The legend went that a young man named Ben, a regular at the Pixel Palace, had become obsessed with Dark Carnival, spending every waking moment at the arcade, his fingers flying across the joystick, his eyes glued to the screen. He poured his allowance into the machine, determined to conquer its fiendishly difficult levels. After weeks of relentless gameplay, Ben finally achieved his goal, his initials flashing proudly at the top of the high-score screen. But his triumph was short-lived. As he celebrated his victory, a surge of electricity, a freak accident, seared through the machine, striking Ben down where he stood. Some say Ben's spirit, unable to leave the game he loved, became trapped within the machine, his digital ghost forever bound to the arcade cabinet. And so the legend of Dark Carnival grew, whispered among the regulars, a chilling tale of obsession and the insatiable hunger for the high score. Most dismissed it as an urban legend, a spooky story meant to deter players from hogging the machine for too long. But there were those who claimed to have witnessed strange occurrences firsthand, the screen flickering erratically, the game playing on its own, the faint sound of laughter echoing from the speakers, a chilling melody that sent shivers down their spines. One evening, a group of friends, their laughter echoing through the arcade, gathered around the Dark Carnival machine, their competitive spirits ignited. Among them was Tony, a skeptic by nature who scoffed at the stories surrounding the game. "It's just an old machine," he declared, "nothing more than wires and circuits." His friends, a mix of believers and those who enjoyed a good scare, exchanged nervous glances as Tony deposited a coin into the machine, the screen bursting to life with a burst of static. As Tony navigated the game's opening levels with ease, his skepticism began to waver. The game seemed to anticipate his every move, the enemies reacting with an almost unnatural precision, as if controlled by a sentient force. One of my favorite hobbies has always been playing video games. When I was younger, I used to do a lot of console gaming, but in recent years, I've done most of my gaming on the PC. So, I have a setup in my bedroom in the apartment that I currently live in. It's in one corner of the room opposite my bed. Several weeks ago, I was having a gaming night with a friend. We both logged on at probably a little after 8 p.m. I was at my apartment, and he was at his apartment, so we were just gaming online. We were going to go until we got tired. I live alone in my small one-bedroom apartment, which is kind of old and on the first floor of the building. After playing online for several hours, neither of us were tired yet. At this point, I'm guessing it was around 11 p.m. That's when I thought I heard a knocking at my window behind me. I had my headset on, which is mostly noise canceling, so I couldn't hear that well, but I looked back to the window. It's probably like 15 feet from my desk and the chair I was sitting in. When I looked, I thought I saw what appeared to be a man moving away from the window. The window looks out to a small grassy area behind the apartments. Then there's a fence between the next property and a little woods before another apartment complex. In all my time living here, I had never really seen anybody out walking back there or anything, so this was kind of strange and also suspicious. The total time that I saw the guy was less than a second, though he was already moving away when I turned around and looked. I told my friend I would be back in a minute, and then I got up. I then walked over to the window and looked out of it. It was pretty dark in the little space back there, but I could see a little bit. However, I did not notice anyone there. I then left my bedroom and walked out to the kitchen, which also had a window looking out to that same general area. This had a broader view, but I still didn't see anyone. I figured that the guy was gone. This situation was kind of weird, especially with it being late at night. My only good explanation that I could think of was that possibly the man accidentally went to the wrong apartment window. He could have been trying to get somebody else's attention who he knew. I then went back to my gaming chair and sat down. I told my friend about what had happened. We chatted about it for a while and decided that it probably wasn't a big deal. However, probably 30 minutes after this or so, I remember looking back to the window. My headset was still on, so I don't remember if I heard anything or if I was just randomly turning around. When I did, though, I saw a man standing at the window. He was looking in. Because of it being dark outside, I did not really see any details of the man's face or what he looked like. Instinctively, I quickly got up from my chair. When I did, the man moved out of sight from the window. I then walked out of my bedroom into my small hallway with just a bathroom and a closet. Then to the right is the living room. It just felt safer to be away from that window. Moments later, before I returned to my bedroom or really did anything, I heard a noise. I was standing in the hallway, and there were a few sort of loud banging noises from my bedroom window. It seemed like possibly the man was going to try to break in. I heard several more loud bangs on the window, and I worried that it would break. I walked over to my door and left my apartment, going into the hallway. Then I called the police. I told them about what happened and said that I thought a man was breaking in. While I waited for the police, I went to the lobby of the apartment building near the front. I felt much better being away from my unit. The police got there minutes later. They searched my apartment and behind it. When I returned to my place, I saw that my window was actually broken and the man had gotten in. Several things were messed up. I was also missing several items. However, the man was able to escape before the police got there. At the end of the day, I was just glad that I left before he broke in. With the window being broken, I went and stayed at a friend's house for the night. The window got repaired the next day. Though I'm mad about having several of my things stolen, it was not even $100 worth of stuff. I am, however, sort of concerned that something like this will happen again. I still live in the same apartment, but luckily, nothing like this has happened since. A few years ago, I used to play video games and stream them online. I was not really popular or anything, I just did it for fun. I would stream on Twitch for my friends, and usually anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 of them would watch. Sometimes they would play with me in the games as well. Every now and then a few other random people would watch the stream too, but I never got more than like 10 viewers at once. I wasn't trying to become famous or anything. One night, I was streaming Fortnite. It was almost a nightly thing for me to do at the time. I was playing with my friend Luck, who was also watching the stream. I remember that at one point, I saw there was another viewer, and soon the new viewer started talking in the chat and leaving comments. I did not recognize the username to be any of my friends, and I realized it was a new person. I said hi to them and welcomed them to the stream. The person responded, saying hi, but a short time later, their comments turned bad. It started with basic insults, calling me names and cursing at me. I assumed it to be some teenage kid just messing around on a Twitch account. I remember asking on the stream why he was so angry. My friend was thinking that it was really funny, though. The comments then got threatening. The user said something like they were going to find me and they knew where I lived or something along those lines. Obviously, I didn't take the threat very seriously. I really had no idea why they would act this way because my stream was always pretty fun and lighthearted. The first comment the person made that really raised my eyebrows, though, was when they mentioned my real name. They said they knew my name, and when I asked what it was, the user commented it. This shocked me because my name was not my username or anything, and this person knew my last name as well. It was then that I figured it had to be one of my friends messing with me, and that's what Luck thought as well. I remember Luck asking who it was, going through a list of friends that he thought it could be. The person denied it all. After going back and forth for a bit, the person eventually left, and I ended the stream a short time later. But the very next night, the person was back. I went back on what I usually did and was playing Fortnite again. Luck also joined, and it was just the two of us like the night prior. Well, maybe 30 minutes into the stream, the mystery person returned. They started commenting again, picking up right where they left off, but this time they said they were going to my house. I was kind of like, okay, buddy, let's see it, and still not taking it seriously. They went quiet in the chat for a while, but then out of nowhere, the person commented that they were at my house. Then I heard this loud knocking coming from the front door. I lived in a house that I rented with a roommate during this time. My roommate was gone at work, and I was at home by myself. After I heard the knocking, I told Luck about it, who seemed shocked. This definitely had to be a friend, I said. I was getting up and went over to go look. After leaving my bedroom and starting to enter the living room, I could see somebody through the front window. There was a man standing on the front step who was wearing all black and a ski mask. He did not resemble any of my friends, but I guess it could have been one of them. I just had a bad feeling about it, though, like this was somebody else. I went back into my bedroom and asked the guy through my stream what he wanted. He did not respond to this, but loudly knocked again on the front door. I was not going to answer it. The mysterious man then made a comment that he hated my car. I don't know why he said this, but then he left the stream. I really had no idea as to what was going on. Me and Luck talked about who it could be, and I told him that I thought it was someone totally random. Luck was telling me that I should go out and confront the guy. Eventually, I left my bedroom to go check, but the guy was gone now. I looked out of every window and didn't see him. Well, the next day, I was leaving for work. When I got to my car in the driveway, there was a big dent in the driver's door, like somebody had hit it with something. I remembered the comment the guy made about hating my car, which is a Pontiac Aztec. Now I knew none of my friends would go so far as to damage my vehicle. After that, I decided to stop streaming for a while. I told all my friends about it, and like I expected, none of them knew who it could be. It remains a mystery to me to this day. I don't live in that house anymore. I did stream on Twitch again a while after it happened, but the guy never joined another stream or at least never said anything. This is one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me. At night, I like to play video games as a hobby quite a bit. This is my scariest experience while doing so. I remember that I was playing online on some game with random people. I had a headset and would talk to them. Most of you know that in online gaming, people sometimes say some crazy stuff, but on this night, it seemed pretty tame. I remember towards the end, shortly before I would go to bed, I was starting to get tired. I was playing this one game with basically just one other person. It was a man, and we were talking about the game over our headsets. During the game, I remember he asked me some somewhat personal questions. I didn't think too much of it and figured that he was just making conversation. The things he asked me were what my name was, to which I only gave my first name, and where I was from. I only told him my state, and I'm pretty sure I asked him the same questions back, but I honestly don't remember his answers. There wasn't anything really that creeped me out or anything. There were maybe a few more questions, but nothing that stood out. I remember that after a while, I got tired, and I told him that I was getting off. I do remember him asking why, and I said that I was going to bed. Afterwards, he sent me a friend request on the game, which was not a big deal. But it was either the following day or the day after that, he sent me a friend request on Facebook. I did not know it at the time, though. When I would go on Facebook, I would accept most friend requests unless it was clearly a bot. This guy appeared real, and I accepted it, not knowing who he was at all. He started to message me a short time later. I remember he said hi and asked me what I was doing and stuff as if we were friends. I asked him who he was and he responded, saying we had played video games together a few days earlier. That's when I realized this had to be the same guy. Obviously, I had no idea what the guy looked like. When I heard this, I was surprised that he had found me on Facebook. I never told him my last name or the city that I was from. It kind of creeped me out. Plus, based on the guy's page and photos, he did seem pretty weird. I decided at that point to delete him as a friend. But the day after that, the guy followed me on Instagram. He then started messaging me there. He asked me why I deleted him and sent me like 4 other messages. When I saw them, I deleted and blocked him from Instagram as well. I thought that was the end of it, but a couple of days later, I got a text message from him out of nowhere. An unknown number texted me. When I looked, I figured it was a wrong number until the texter said their name, and it was a long, angry text about how I blocked him and stuff. This creeped me out more than anything. I blocked his number and hoped that I would stop hearing from him. Obviously, I deleted him from being friends on the game as well. After this, I did stop hearing from him. I still wonder, though, how he found me. I mean, the only thing he had to go off of was my first name and state. How did he find my number? My only thought is that he possibly messaged somebody who knew me on Facebook, claiming that he was my friend and wanted to know my number or something. I never asked around, so I can't confirm it, though. Either way, it's really creepy what he did, and I'm glad that I haven't heard from him since. It took place back when I was in high school. I was, I believe, a junior during this time and loved to play video games. I had a good friend at school named Noah, who I would game with almost on a nightly basis. We would hang out all the time as well, and he lived just a few blocks over. On this night, we were playing video games online on our PlayStation 4s. I was at my house, and he was at his. We had headsets so we could talk to each other as we were on. I remember that after playing for a while, Noah said, "What was that?" It kind of came out of nowhere, and I assumed that he was just talking about the game. I asked him what, and he didn't answer me at first. Then all of a sudden, he said, "What the," and it kind of abruptly went quiet. I heard some other noises but couldn't make them out. I didn't know what was going on. I asked Noah what he was doing, but he did not answer me. Everything was silent for a while. After, I sent Noah a Snapchat asking him what that was all about. I was really confused, but Noah did not immediately open it. So, I got curious and was kind of concerned. I decided to walk over to his place. Maybe he was playing a prank on me, but I felt like I should go ask him. We were such good friends, and it wasn't that weird for me to do that. So, I left my house at whatever time it was, probably like 10 p.m. It was dark out, and after walking a few blocks, I arrived at Noah's street. It was quiet, and we both lived in a pretty typical neighborhood for the most part. When I reached Noah's house, I wasn't sure if his parents were home or not because most of the lights in the house appeared to be off. I walked up to the front door and knocked on it. At first, there was no answer. It was very quiet. But a short time after knocking, I heard what sounded like somebody who may be in the backyard. After waiting a while, I knocked again. I couldn't see into the backyard from where I was. I continued to wait at the front door, wondering if I should investigate the noises I had heard in the back. Maybe Noah had gone outside, but I didn't really know why he would. Then finally, I heard someone walking towards the front door inside. The door then opened, and Noah was standing there. He looked very serious and told me to come inside quickly. I got in, and then he closed and locked the door. He said a man had been inside his house, and he was calling the police. He added that he thought the man just left. Noah went back and got his phone from his bedroom and dialed 911. He told me that his parents were gone, and he was home alone. We both waited for the police in his parents' room because it had a lock on it. Nobody else entered the house or was in it while we waited. The police got there shortly after and spoke to us. I guess what happened is when I was gaming with Noah, he heard a noise from behind his house. It sounded like the back door, which led to the kitchen, was opening. It must have been left unlocked or something because an unknown person did, in fact, enter. After hearing the footsteps, Noah ran to his closet to hide. He was able to hide but did not have his phone and couldn't call the police. Then I must have heard him running to his closet, and he said that he completely forgot about me on the headset. The headset was also not wireless, so he had to take it off to hide in his closet. While hiding, he heard the person walking around inside of his house. He hid all the way until I arrived at his place. When he heard the knock on the door, he said the man started walking around quickly and then left the house. I realized that I must have scared the guy off by knocking on the door. Noah was grateful to me for doing so. He then was able to leave, lock all the doors, get his phone to call the police, which was on the floor near his bed, and let me in the house. I don't know why the man entered the house or how he seemed to know that the door would be unlocked, but I'm really glad that I went over to Noah's. I went to summer camp a few times when I was a Boy Scout. It was usually pretty fun, especially the parts of the day we got to spend doing whatever we wanted. Nobody was actually invested in earning numeric badges unless it was for something cool, like wakeboarding. All we really cared about was messing around in the woods and swimming in the springs to beat the heat. It was a nice time just to be away from home and our parents for a week. The only thing a Boy Scout was missing was a girl to gallivant with. In the beginning, I thought I would go to summer camp every year if I could. However, things took a turn when I was 13 years old. After this trip, I left my troop and never went camping again. It was on the 4th day of summer camp, right in the middle of everything as far as responsibilities were concerned. It was a light day for me and my friends, 4 of us in all. We ran around the main common area of the campgrounds, used our allowances to buy ourselves each a souvenir knife at the general store, drank some yoo-hoos, and threw some tomahawks with the weapons guy between his classes. Eventually, 2 of us decided that we were getting tired and sweaty and just wanted to sit around in our tents until dinner time. But my closer friend Enoch and I wanted to keep it going. There was a network of trails that snaked all around the various campsites. We'd already taken the trail to the springs, so Enoch and I wanted to do a little more exploration. There were just the 2 of us, so we both had canteens full of water and snacks in our pockets, along with knives and cordage, a map, a compass, and I had a small first aid kit. We thought we were prepared for whatever we would run into out there. We didn't plan on going far either since we had to be back in a little under 3 hours for dinner. We set out from our troop's campsite with plenty of daylight left and made our way into a mosquito-infested area of woods. The canopy shaded us pretty well, and the air was humid and stifling. We wanted to see what it was like out there, but all we discovered was that the trees were a bit taller. It wasn't long before we started to make conversation over the sound of afternoon bugs, the sort of bonding you would expect to occur between 2 13-year-olds in the woods. We talked about girls mostly in the ones that we thought were ugly, so on and so forth. None of it was very tasteful, admittedly. We jokingly proposed that it was possible for us to go far enough that we would find our way into the Girl Scout section of the campgrounds, which did exist but was well separated from the Boy Scouts. Then, our surroundings started to change inexplicably. Suddenly, there was a breeze washing away the warm blanket of moist, motionless air and replacing it with cool, dry wind. Initially, this was a great relief to me and Enoch, who had been sweating profusely for hours, even in the shade. It also seemed to drive away all the mosquitoes and gnats, which was a welcome bonus. But just a few moments later, the woods quickly darkened, and the sky above us, between the branches of the canopy, went from vibrant blue to a pale gray. "Hey Enoch," I said, concerned, "I think it's about to rain." "No kidding," he agreed. "More like we're about to get caught up in a thunderstorm. Should we turn back?" I suggested. "No," Enoch replied with confidence, looking down at his compass. "The trail that we're on loops back to camp. Right now we're heading due north, which means we're right in the middle. We might as well just keep going." "Well, sure," I said. Enoch seemed to be pretty confident about his navigation skills, so I let him make the decision to press on. However, the threat of being soaked to the bone put a damper on the mood, and as such, there was a lull in the conversation. We hiked on, listening for oncoming thunder and waiting to feel the first raindrop land on our heads, except it never came. The darkness that descended on us only increased, but rain never fell. "Hey Enoch," I said again, even more concerned this time. "Will you check the time, man? I think we might have missed dinner." Enoch looked down at his watch. "No way, man. We've only been hiking 4, and then, suddenly, Enoch went silent and stopped in his tracks. "What is it, man?" I asked. "My watch is dead," he said gravely. "How is that possible? I thought you replaced the battery before going to camp." Enoch silenced me and started looking all around. "You hear that?" he whispered. I listened but didn't hear anything. Actually, I heard so much of nothing that it struck fear into my heart. It was totally silent, not a sound in the woods all around us. It was an unnatural quiet, devoid of any cicadas or even flies. For a minute, I peered deeper and deeper into the woods with my ears and heard only silence. Until finally, I heard singing, angelic singing, but it was so soft and quiet that it was almost inaudible but unmistakably the voice of a beautiful woman. Just by the way Enoch looked at me in that moment, wide-eyed and grinning, I knew he heard it too. "Oh, it's the Girl Scouts," he exclaimed. Before I could even respond, he bolted into the woods to go after the sounds. "Wait, Enoch, stop," I started to go with him, but by the time I had taken 10 steps off the trail, I realized I couldn't see well enough to go any farther. It was like the sky had fallen, darkness, like the dead of midnight, had snuffed out the light of day in merely a moment. A deep sense of dread filled my body, telling me to turn back. I backtracked the 10 steps I had taken without even turning around until I felt the flatness of the trail beneath my shoe again. At this point, all I could hear was my own breathing and heartbeat, and the singing, whoever was in the woods, growing louder and drawing near. But something was wrong. The sound no longer came from a single direction. Somehow, it was circling all around me, closing in on me. It was too loud to bear, and I felt like it was putting physical pressure on my body. I tried to cover my ears, but it was just useless. It all became a single, piercing cry. Finally, I heard a scream, a boy's scream. It cut through the cacophony and returned my surroundings to total silence, except for the echo of someone's cry for help. "Enoch," I called into the woods. "Come back," there was no reply. A moment later, I heard a twig snap on the trail from the direction we'd just come from. I hoped to see Enoch, but I didn't. Instead, there was an inhumane figure at the nearest bend in the trail, the shape of a tall woman, but composed of no flesh or bone whatsoever, only ominous light. As I gazed upon whatever spirit this was, it suddenly raced toward me. What I did next was pure instinct. I abandoned Enoch and ran blindly down the trail as quickly as my body could take me. I didn't stop until I spilled out into the campsite again, collapsing to the ground. When I looked up, I saw that everything was different. The sun was shining, the woods were alive with birds and bugs, and all of my friends were coming to see what was wrong with me, why I was so upset and panicky. I couldn't speak a word for hours. When I could finally tell the scout masters what happened, they didn't believe me. They sent a search party for Enoch, but they couldn't find a single trace of him. Even the police were never able to locate him, he simply vanished. Suspicion eventually turned to me because the story I told was so unbelievable. So, to avoid being put in an asylum, I ended up changing my official statement to losing track of him when we both went to take a piss at separate trees. I turned my back for just a minute, and then he was gone. In my worry and panic, I thought I saw something that wasn't there. But it's all lies because I know what happened. When I was in middle school, I was desperate for friends. I tried to talk to anyone that would let me sit with them, but nobody ever seemed to like me enough to keep me around, or they would just be mean to me. That's why, when the two prettiest, most popular girls in school, Azure and Alita, invited me to a sleepover with them, I was thrilled. I had tried sitting with them at lunch a few times before, but they always told me to go away because they were busy talking about something that wasn't my business. Then, on the last day of school one year, they both came up to me while I was sitting by myself. They said they really wanted to hang out with me over the summer but didn't want other people to see us hanging out together while we were still in school. Even as a naive and lonely middle schooler, I knew that was a severely underhanded invite, but I accepted it with enthusiasm anyway. I would take what I could get, and they knew it. Of course, my mom was just glad I was finally starting to hang out with other kids, and she gladly gave me permission to go, especially when I said that Azure's mom offered to serve all three of us dinner. When I got there, it was about 8 p.m., and I was already dressed in my pajamas. Alita and Azure were still fully dressed. When I asked if we were still going to have dinner together, Azure said that they had just finished eating right before I got there. Then Alita said I didn't need to eat so much anyway. They were already putting me down, but I wanted to be friends with them so badly that I let them do it. After I said hi to Azure's mom, who was already wine drunk and ready for us to not be her problem anymore, we all went up to Azure's room upstairs. It was a Jack and Jill style bedroom with her own bathroom and another bedroom on the other side. I asked Azure who was in the other room, but she snapped at me and said it was her older sister and told me not to be so nosy. I apologized profusely, but they just told me to be quiet because my voice was annoying. Azure had a bunch of awesome stuff in her room, from Taylor Swift posters to expensive makeup and giant stuffed animals, things that my mom couldn't afford to get me. But as much as I wanted to ask her about it, I knew she wouldn't like that, so I just looked at the floor. We started to play Truth or Dare, which Alita and Azure used to mine all sorts of information about me, including who I had a crush on and how much money my parents made. I told them everything honestly, only for them to laugh in my face every time. Whenever I asked them to tell the truth about something, they made up a bunch of ridiculous stuff that I knew was a lie, but of course, I wasn't going to call them out on it. When I finally got sick and tired of having to spill all my beans, I told them to dare me to do something. As soon as I said that, Alita and Azure looked at each other with the most wicked smiles, like they had been waiting for me to say that the whole time. Then Azure dared me to go into the bathroom and play the Bloody Mary game. I didn't know what it was at the time, and when I admitted this, they both screamed in disbelief that I didn't know who Bloody Mary was. They explained it to me and said I had to do it or I would have to leave the sleepover. I wanted to stay, so I stepped inside the bathroom. Azure and Alita lit a candle in front of the mirror, then they turned off the lights and shut the door. "You have to say it loud and clear," Azure teased me from the other side. "If you don't, we'll know." I was shaking. I had no idea what would happen. Was this Bloody Mary someone that could really be summoned? Would she really kill me if she came? I didn't know, but the only thing that pushed me forward was the need to be accepted and the belief that things like ghosts didn't exist. I looked at myself in the mirror, took a deep breath, and said, "Bloody Mary," 3 times slowly. For a moment, nothing happened. I looked behind my reflection, and there was nothing, until I saw a woman crawling out of the bathtub behind me. I screamed and turned around, and I realized it was real. There was a real bloody woman sitting in the shower. Her skin was gray, like she was dead, and her clothes were torn up. But her eyes were open, and she was looking right at me. Slowly, the woman stepped out of the tub and started walking toward me. I was so petrified I couldn't move. I wanted to, but it was like my legs had turned to stone. With every step she took, she left a trail of blood. Soon, she was right in front of me. I screamed again, but she grabbed me by the throat and lifted me up to my tiptoes. She opened her mouth and revealed a gaping jaw full of blood and blackness, inching toward my neck like she was going to take a bite out of it. I couldn't maintain control of myself, so in that moment, I peed my pants. But then, at the last second, the doors swung open and the lights turned on. "What's going on in here?" Azure asked. "Why are you screaming?" I could barely get a word out through my stuttering teeth, but I managed what I could. "Bloody Mary was here," I said. "She was right in front of me. I saw her, and it was real. She grabbed me and everything, and she tried to kill me." Alida and Azure said, almost in unison, "What?" They looked all around the bathroom, but of course, she was gone. "Stop acting crazy," said Alida. "You're just begging for attention." "Honestly, it's kind of embarrassing," Azure snickered and agreed. "Wait, did you pee yourself?" "That's disgusting," Alida exclaimed. "Oh my God, so yeah, actually, I think if you're going to act like that, you just have to leave." "What? Why?" I asked in disbelief. But before I knew it, Azure and Alida dragged me out of the bathroom and pushed me down the stairs, then threw all my stuff at me. I crawled to Azure's mother, a sobbing mess, and begged her to call my mom. Based on the look in her eyes and the way she sighed, I think she was very close to just letting me cry myself to sleep on the ground. But thankfully, she had the basic decency to call my mother so I could get out of that awful house. I never fully explained to my mother what happened, except for the fact that they were so mean that I cried. I hid the bruises from being pushed down the steps, and I wore turtlenecks for the next few weeks to hide the bruises on my neck. That was how my summer vacation began that year. Needless to say, I never left the house again until school was back in session. As for Bloody Mary, Azure and Alida's gaslighting was so effective on me that I honestly believed she existed for over 2 years after that. Until one day, I told this story to my first real friend in high school, and they explained to me the obvious truth that it was just Azure's older sister in a convincing costume. I'm 18 years old and going to be a freshman in college this September. This past July, my friend Zelda held a pool party in her backyard as a sort of graduation party, minus any of her family being around because her parents were away. She often has the house to herself, so her parents' house is the go-to spot for a lot of hangouts. She invited like 100 people from our grade. There had to be upwards of 150 people there at the night's peak. I was one of the first to show up with my friend Jonah because we're close with Zelda, so we wanted to help out a little bit. By the time people started showing up, everyone congregated slowly from the kitchen and living room to outside in the backyard by the pool. Some people brought their bathing suits and jumped into the pool, others just jumped in their underwear, and then, of course, most others just stood around the pool. She has a huge backyard. At a certain point, so many people were at the party that it was clear as day people were bringing friends from other schools because we didn't know everyone there. Zelda was getting mad because she made it clear she didn't want randoms. In fact, unfamiliar people seemed to be just barging through the gate, not even accompanied by people from our school or grade. There wasn't much we could do, though. The party was already too crazy to easily control. Zelda did throw in our class group chat not to bring any more randoms or they'd be asked to leave. The problems seemed to slow down after that. At around 1 a.m., the police came to the house and had to shut down the party due to multiple complaints from neighbors, so the music was turned off, and 99% of the guests were asked to leave. Mostly everyone cleared out except a few close friends, including some of Zelda's girlfriends, Letitia and I, and a few other guy friends. We helped do some cleaning, like picking up all the empty cans and bottles. Eventually, it was just 4 of us left there. I'm talking at like 3 a.m., if not later. Since it was hot outside, we migrated to the inside of the house in the air conditioning, where we were just chilling in the living room, continuing to drink. Then we all heard a distinct crack from upstairs, and we went silent. Zelda was the first to ask what was that as we all looked at each other with these wide-eyed, half-laughing, half-freaked-out faces. Letitia and I left, teasing Zelda that someone was upstairs in her room, and she begged us to stop and check it out, so we did. We went upstairs to Zelda's room. It was clear. We then went to the guest room that used to be her older brother's room, and we found one of our friends, Eudora, passed out in the bed. We went downstairs to tell her that Eudora was upstairs and knocked out. I guess that gave her a sigh of relief. Looking back, that didn't much explain a sound coming from upstairs if he was knocked out in bed, though, but we weren't exactly the most coherent at that moment. Eventually, Zelda and her friend Mia went to sleep in her room, Letitia fell asleep on the couch, and I went to her parents' bed. None of us were okay to drive anywhere. I can't remember how much time passed before I remember one of the girls screaming in the next room over, and then both of them. It was a heart-dropping kind of moment, but I didn't know if they were messing around with each other at first or not, but I realized pretty quickly the screams were way too real. I burst out of the bed and went to Zelda's room and opened the door. The lights were out. I could barely see anything except for the 2 girls huddled up, hugging each other in the corner of the room, basically curled up on the floor. I saw what they were screaming at. There was a tall person in the opposite corner of the room, on the other side of the bed from them. I saw him looking at me in the doorway. I yelled at the girls to run, and they did. There was so much yelling that even Eudora woke up and came out as the girls ran downstairs, screaming that the man was touching their feet. We followed, but looking back with 3 guys there, we regrettably didn't try to overpower that one man. We all left the house, and one of us called the police, waiting by the neighbor's house with the neighbors, possibly the same ones who called the cops on the party. We didn't see the man leave the front door ever, and after police searched the house and couldn't find him, that meant he left through the back door. None of us recognized who that man was. It was probably an older man who knew Zelda somehow that snuck into the house during the commotion of the party and thought Zelda would be alone after the party. It's some sick, scary stuff. Whether we could have overpowered him or not, we'll never know because we don't know if he was armed. There's a nice quiet scenic creek not far from my house. I like to drive my kayak up to it every once in a while on the weekends in the summer. This one particular weekend was one of those weekends. The weather was perfect, sunny and 70s. I'd kayaked down this creek a bunch of times and never had I seen anyone else kayaking it. That's part of the reason I like it because I'm a very reserved person and I like to do things myself, preferably with privacy. So, I set out on the kayak not far from where I'd parked my car, which is in a gravelly dirt parking area right off the road. There was one other car that pulled in a few minutes after I did, which was unusual. I'd never seen any other cars except my own here. 20 minutes into my kayaking, someone came out from the woods ahead of me, coming up on the left, and approached the edge of the water. He stopped and waved at me and smiled. He put his hands on his hips and greeted me. It seemed he had an expectation for me to stop and chat. I instantly knew I didn't like his smile, but my mother raised me to be polite to everybody, so I stopped paddling and smiled and greeted him back. There was an awkward pause where he was just nodding his head with his closed-lipped smile, and I had to break the silence by saying, "It's a beautiful day out." He nodded his head and said, "Yup," then asked where I'm from. I made something up and said, "From up north, just visiting." He clearly lacked the ability to hold any sort of conversation, and that's coming from me. I'm not the most social person myself. So, I wanted to just move along. I told him to have a great rest of his day and continued onward down the river. Never in a million years was I expecting what happened next to happen. I turned when I heard a snap of a stick or something from not far behind me. There, in the not-so-far distance, was the guy hiding behind a couple of trees, seemingly following me. I was disturbed and uncomfortable, like he was clearly trying to not be seen. I was scared to call him out in fear of how he might respond, so I pretended not to notice him and continued to kayak down. I would continue to side glance every so often to see if he was still following me, and he was. I had never wanted to see someone else in the water so much in my life. I took out my phone to try to call my dad or my brother for help, but of course, I had no cell reception out there. Still, instead of being followed and probably attacked, I decided to stop in my place, turn around, and threaten to call the police if he didn't stop following me. The man just stood in place behind another big tree, though he was clear as day there. I then decided to fake call the cops. I raised my phone in the air at the man and said, "I see you there, I'm calling them now." I then proceeded to fake a phone call, pretending like I'm talking to the police. The man started to walk away deeper into the woods. It seemed to have worked. I turned around immediately and started kayaking back up the way I came as fast as I possibly could. I would constantly look over my shoulders until I got back to where I launched the kayak. I made it safely. I checked my whole surroundings before stepping out of the water and carrying my kayak back to my car. The other car in the little parking area was still there, but I made a disturbing discovery that may have saved my life. Up until this point, everything that happened could have maybe been explained away. However, I noticed broken glass near the back of my car, and the back passenger's side window wasn't there anymore. It had been shattered. I didn't step 1 foot closer to my car. I stayed hidden in the woods and checked if I had bars now that I was closer to the road. I did, and I called 911 successfully. I reported the whole incident and the broken window, and I stated I was scared I was still being followed. Waiting for the police to arrive felt like the longest, most tense moment of my life. It dragged on far too long, but when they pulled into the dirt area, I finally came out from the woods and waved at them. I pointed to the car, and 2 police officers came out and approached the car, where they found him, the man from the woods, waiting in the back seat of my car, hiding and waiting for me to enter my car to grab me. It was beyond satisfying to see him arrested. He definitely wasn't smiling anymore. I looked at him as it almost seemed like he was avoiding looking at me as he was taken to the police car. I'm happy the man was so stupid that he thought I wouldn't notice shattered glass all over the side of my car. What you're about to hear is something that will sound like it was straight from a horror movie, but it's absolutely true. Every summer, my friends and I go on a camping trip to a new location. It's a tradition we've had for years. One year, we chose a hiking trail in West Glacier, Montana. My friend Enda is a photographer, so he always likes to bring his camera equipment and get lots of nature shots. Our first day there, the three of us did a lot of hiking and exploring, taking in the sights and allowing Enda to get a lot of shots. That first night there, nothing was out of the ordinary. We had 2 tents. I was alone in mine while the other 2 shared theirs. The next day, we did some fishing at a nearby river and a few other things that aren't really that interesting to talk about, but that second night was where things got weird. The fire had just been put out, and we went to our respective tents. None of us had even fallen asleep yet when we started hearing sounds from out in the woods. It was very clearly a person's voice. It sounded like an older woman's voice. It kept getting louder and more clear every 10 seconds or so. I called over to my friend's tent right next to mine, asking if they heard that, and they called back saying yes, someone was out there. The voice got so close and so clear that we could hear her saying, "Hello." I was shaking in my socks. Maybe you might think we're bad people for not jumping to help an older woman who may have been stranded in the woods, but that just didn't seem right. Being in the middle of the woods at night hearing someone calling out, "Hello," is beyond terrifying. I heard footsteps approach the tent, then stop. The voice once again said, "Hello," but it was right outside the tent this time, and now that it was this close, it didn't sound like a woman anymore. It sounded like a man trying to sound like a woman, raising the pitch in his voice. The person outside my tent suddenly started shaking the tent aggressively, and I freaked out and screamed, "What do you want?" My friend shouted to go away to the person. The shaking then stopped as suddenly as it started, and I heard the footsteps quickly hurry away. I waited a few moments before unzipping my tent and grabbing my sleeping bag to go to my friend's tent. Even those brief 5 seconds outside the tent, I felt like I was going to be grabbed at any moment. I felt safer as I was in the tent with them and not alone anymore. None of us knew what to think, but we all 3 agreed it didn't sound like an actual woman. It sounded like some creepy man pretending to be one to get us to let our guards down. The question was why, though. Was he carrying a weapon? Either way, we didn't think it was safe to get up and leave now. We agreed to leave first thing in the morning, as soon as the sun would begin to rise. We also agreed that someone would need to stay awake at all times to keep watch, so we agreed to take turns sleeping. My friend Gabriel took the first shift while Enda and I tried to sleep, which was hard to do after what just happened, especially when we'd keep thinking we were hearing footsteps surrounding the tent. Eventually, though, after many tense hours, I managed to fall asleep out of pure exhaustion. I never woke up until morning time because, apparently, Enda fell asleep on his shift, and we were all asleep by that point. We were happy the sun was up, so we packed our stuff and headed back to the truck. It was a long ride home, and during the drive, Enda was going through his camera, looking at the shots that he got over the course of the 2 days there. The last 3 pictures, however, were not pictures that he took. There were 2 pictures taken of our campsite while it was still dark out. The 3rd picture was taken inside of our tent with all 3 of us asleep. Nothing was missing or stolen, strangely enough, and none of us were attacked in any way. Yet it remains the most up thing that has ever happened to any of us. Some random creep out in the woods stalking our tent and waiting for the right moment to enter our campsite, go through our stuff, sneak into our tent, and take a picture of all 3 of us, probably just to freak us out. And whoever it was, they accomplished their goal for sure. Summer is the greatest season by a long shot. That's a hill I'll die on any day. My love for the summer doesn't revolve around partying or drinking, as you may expect, but nature, warmer weather, and the outdoors are inseparable in my opinion. And I guarantee you that when the heat rolls through, I spend more hours outside than inside. It was a warm night in mid-June a few summers ago when this happened. I was 16 or 17 at the time. For context, there's a massive nature preserve near my house. When I say massive, I mean it. It's close to 1,000 acres in size. To this day, there are still parts of it that I'm positive I haven't explored. 2 of my friends and I agreed to spend a night camping in those woods. Technically, camping there was strictly forbidden and borderline illegal, but we figured that there was no chance someone would catch us in this dense forest. We just had to trek as deeply as possible. Zane was the camping fanatic of the group. I'm telling you, this kid loved cosplaying as a Boy Scout and probably knew close to 100 different knots. Our other friend Clement always supplied the drinks. If we were sober, he was unhappy. That's just how things went when Clement was involved. I remember the feeling of the gentle summer breeze blowing through my hair as the 3 of us packed up Clement's car. The weather was ideal, not too cold, not too hot. A few beers later, the 3 of us found ourselves lugging camping equipment through the woods at like 11:40. I can't lie, I was feeling the alcohol start to hit me as we marched along. Zane always carried this industrial-grade flashlight with him, so the darkness of the forest wasn't much of an issue. As much as I enjoyed the outdoors, though, traversing through thick woods at this hour was a bit creepy, even with Zane's flashlight on hand. After close to half an hour of straight walking, the 3 of us found ourselves in a small flat clearing that was an ideal spot to set up camp. We pitched our tent as per Zane's instruction and set our chairs up. The fire was the next step. Zane once again took the lead on this, and after a few more minutes, we had a pretty decent fire going. Clement reached into his bag and tossed me another drink. He then grabbed his JBL speaker and started playing some music. The vibe was perfect, and we must have been talking and drinking for a good 2 hours. We were all pretty drunk at that point, and I could tell the other guys were just about ready to pack it up for the night. Clement turned the music down and started collecting discarded beer cans. Just then, a deafening whistle pierced the silence. I nearly jumped out of my seat, going from drunken haze to high alert in a matter of seconds. I don't know how to describe it. The whistle was abnormally loud but still sounded distant. Clement quickly shut the speaker off, and the 3 of us sat in silence as we exchanged concerned looks. I could feel my heartbeat pounding through my chest. We sat there frozen in place for what seemed like forever, listening intently to our surroundings, but there was nothing. It almost seemed quieter now than it had when we first got there, like eerily quiet. Not even the normal wood sounds you come to anticipate. I used that time to replay my memory of the whistle back in my head. It definitely wasn't an animal's noise. The best way I can describe it is a standard whistle you would hear at a ballpark. Zane finally broke the silence, quietly urging us to pack up and leave. Clement and I disagreed with that plan, though. We might risk encountering whoever made the noise, which I was beyond terrified of. It was past 3 a.m. at this point, and an encounter this late would only mean trouble. Zane hypothesized that whoever made that noise was probably aware of our presence, which was a chilling thought. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, staying put violated every survival instinct I had. Packing up and leaving at this hour didn't seem like a much better option either, though. We finally agreed to wait it out. I went to put the fire out, but Zane cautioned me against it, saying that a fire would repel any dangerous animals. Only then did the true gravity of the situation smack me in the face. We were literally miles away from any civilization. It was 3 a.m., and there was an unknown entity somewhere in the darkness. Another 10 minutes or so passed, and we had resumed talking, but at a much lower volume and with no music. I don't think any of us felt safe going to sleep just yet. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Something small flew over the darkness of Clement's shoulder and landed directly in the fire. It was a firecracker. I screamed bloody murder as it started sparkling in the fire, and Zane cursed as he sprung up out of his chair and bolted into the darkness. Clement and I scrambled to follow, leaving all of our stuff behind. We caught up with Zane, whose flashlight was beaming wildly through the woods as he frantically sprinted. We ran until we couldn't anymore, and Clement keeled over and threw up. Zane shut the light off, and the three of us stood there panting, trying to figure out if we were being followed. To my surprise, it didn't seem like anyone followed us. I don't think I've ever been so afraid. Why in the world would someone have done that? We needed to figure out what to do. Clement wanted to just find our way out of the woods and never come back, but Zane was reluctant to leave all of his camping gear behind. Plus, he reminded us the fire was still active. I was dumbfounded. How could he be concerned with forest fires after what had just happened? Eventually, I agreed with Zane that we should at least check on the site. After all, no one had actually chased us, so there was a slight possibility that whoever threw that firecracker was just playing a cruel prank. Zane was a navigational expert and was actually able to retrace our footsteps. I could make out the glow of the fire as we quietly approached. Before I could get any closer, though, Clement put a hand in front of me and pointed with a horrified look on his face. I strained my eyes to make out the sight in the distance. What I saw is probably the most terrifying thing I'd ever laid eyes on. There were 3 people sitting motionlessly in our chairs like statues. The one whose face I could see looked lifeless, and his mouth was hung open. I was afraid to move. What were they even doing? I thought, realizing that they weren't even talking. This was not normal. The 3 of us watched for a little while longer before deciding to back off. We turned to leave, but Clement's foot clipped a rock, causing him to curse in frustration. Within seconds, the glow from the fire abruptly went dark, as if it had been covered with a cloak. It was freakishly fast. We didn't stick around another second. We again sprinted away from the site, but this time we could hear footsteps crashing behind us. We didn't stop this time. We bolted out of the woods and ran all the way to Clement's car. By some miracle, we weren't followed out of the woods. None of us spoke on the drive back, each of us lost in our thoughts. The next day, Zane insisted we return to the site in the daylight to collect his belongings. Clement wanted nothing to do with that, but I agreed to accompany Zane. After some searching, we eventually found the site, which looked mostly untouched. That is, until we got a little closer and noticed the putrid smell coming from Zane's tent. He unzipped it, and we found a dead, rotting rat. It was sickening. I took the hint and haven't been back to that preserve since. This ongoing issue started about a month ago, but let me provide some context first. I'm 25 years old and I live with my parents. My family is not well off and never has been, and pretty much all the money I make goes into supporting the household. My relationship with my parents is not the best. We bicker quite often, and whenever I'm not working or hanging with friends, I tend to stick to myself. I don't want to write a hard luck story or anything like that, but I've had a tough time growing up. Fitness has always been my go-to escape. I see it as a healthy way to get my mind off personal burdens while also providing a good excuse to leave the house. There's a park about a 20-minute drive from my house that has a workout facility with bars for pull-ups, dips, and other calisthenic exercises. During the summer months, I like to go there to work out, as nature helps calm my mind. I like to go at nighttime because, since it's a public park, it tends to get busy during the day. So, one night while my parents were arguing, I decided to slip out of the house to go work out. It was an extremely hot summer night, probably 85 degrees. I remember breathing in the humid air as I walked from my doorstep to the beat-up white Corolla sitting in our driveway. I started the rickety engine and rolled down the windows as the warm summer breeze flowed through my hair. I arrived at the park and exited my car. I was the only car in the lot. It was probably 10 or 11 p.m. The park was completely empty at this time. The beautiful scenery mixed with the steamy air to create a soothing atmosphere, which is another reason why I like this park so much. It sits on top of a hill that overlooks the downtown area of my city, which always adds pleasant and sentimental emotions to my evenings. Anyway, I started a set on the pull-up bar. I wasn't really counting the repetitions. When I work out, I just do it till failure, then take a break and do it a couple more times. It was somewhere between my sets when I took a break to loosen up my arms. Before I got back on the bar, though, an indescribable feeling came over me, and a subconscious urge forced me to turn my head around. Standing literally a foot away from my face was a tall, beaten-looking man. I actually screamed and jumped like 5 feet back. He let out a raunchy, boisterous laugh and apologized, saying he didn't mean to scare me. His appearance and mannerisms were extremely eccentric right off the bat, like he was damn near face to face with me. He clearly had something wrong with him. I asked him why he was so close to me, and he said he lives here. He explained that he sees me working out here all the time and asked me if I could teach him. Now, I'm a very non-confrontational type of person, and especially during a time like that, I really just wanted to be left alone. I awkwardly but politely told him I was just going to do some pull-ups and leave. I hopped back on the bar and continued my set. His words marinated in my mind. He sees me here all the time. I felt the gaze of his eyes burning the back of my neck, but like I said, I'm very non-confrontational. While he did make me increasingly uneasy, I didn't really know what to say or do about it. But then something really weird happened. Right as I was about to finish my set, I heard him mutter my full name. My blood instantly turned cold as I jumped off the bar and slowly backed away. I said a shaky, "What?" He didn't respond and instead just stared at me with this crazed, wide-eyed smile. I thought I might have been hearing things, that's how bizarre it was. I started to get an awful feeling in my gut, like something bad was about to happen. Without another word, I decided to quickly walk back to my car and leave. I felt that man staring at me while I retreated, and thankfully he didn't follow me. Before I left the park, though, I took one last look and saw him hanging from the bar, attempting to do a pull-up. I watched as he grabbed the bar, tried to pull himself up, and then failed and tried again in the exact position I was previously in. I swiftly left the park without looking back. The entire ride back, I questioned myself. Did he really say my name? Was I hallucinating? I tried to forget about it, and eventually, I did. I woke up early the next day to get to work. I work construction and have to wake up very early before my parents, so I was the first one to notice the unmarked envelope sitting at my front door. It was addressed to me. I picked it up and figured I'd read whatever was inside whenever I had the chance. It was another sweltering hot summer day, and I took my lunch break early to cool down. I sat in my car while eating my pre-made sandwich and decided to open the envelope. I didn't really know what to expect, but never in a million years did I think I'd find 10 printed photos of me. They were all unknowingly taken. One was of me in my car, one was of me at work, one was of me exercising at the park. I instantly remembered that creepy man from the night before and started to feel uncontrollably nauseous. I stared in disbelief as I flipped through the rest of them. One was of my house, and the worst of all was a photo of me sleeping, taken from outside my window. I nearly choked on my food as tears rolled down my cheeks. I felt unsafe. I told my boss a serious issue popped up, and I left work right away. He wasn't happy with me, but I didn't care. I took a picture of the photos and drove directly to the police station. I gave the police the photos and explained my encounter at the park. I described the man to them, and they said they would look into it. I told my parents about it too, and for the first time in a long time, I actually got some sympathy out of them. More things started happening, though. A couple of nights later, at like 3 a.m., I awoke to knocks at the door. I didn't open it, assuming the worst. One day, I found a sticky note pasted to my car window with a heart drawn in Sharpie. I went back to the police to report this, and they said they would open up a stalker investigation. I haven't heard back from them yet. I figured it's hard to build a case without having concrete evidence. This happened about a month ago, and I've been on high alert ever since. My parents are looking for a new home, which is already tough given our financial situation. I'll update if anything further happens, but until then, I'll continue to sleep with one eye open. This happened to me last summer when I was 23. I wasn't a very outgoing kid at the time. If I ever did anything social, it was because my degenerate friends had somehow dragged me out of the house. This was one of those times, well, it was supposed to be. My friend Ralph invited me to a house party at like 8 p.m. It was pretty spontaneous, but I had nothing going on, so I reluctantly agreed to go with him. I knew he was going to give me crap if I refused. I can't even lie, though, the idea of a party, even with strangers, sounded more appealing than being alone. Ralph was a few towns over from me, so it made more sense for us to drive separately instead of going together. He gave me the address, and I was on my way. The literal second I pulled onto the street, Ralph bailed at the last minute. Rightfully so, I was super frustrated. How could he bail on me like this? There I was, feeling like a complete idiot outside a stranger's house. Annoyed but determined not to waste the night, I decided to go in. I drove all the way here, I thought. Might as well go inside. I walked up the front steps and knocked on the door. The host, Crispin, greeted me warmly. He was instantly likable, charismatic, and friendly without being a douchebag. He introduced me around, and things were actually less awkward than I had anticipated. People were really friendly to me despite not knowing who I was. There were even a few girls I had my eyes on. I decided to enjoy the party and hit the booze hard. It was getting pretty late, but the party was still raging. Admittedly, I might have overdone it with the drinking. At one point, I was so nauseous and dizzy that I needed a break. It must have been close to 3 a.m. at that point. I went upstairs to look for a bathroom, but they were all occupied. The house was deceptively big. Granted, it was probably the alcohol, but I was literally getting lost stumbling through the maze of hallways up there. After making it to the top floor, I found a door leading to what seemed like an attic or storage room. Desperate for privacy, I figured it was as good a place as any to pull myself together. I groped around blindly for the light switch, but there was none. This was definitely an attic or something, as there was also dust everywhere. There was a window in the far corner, which I opened, allowing the cool night breeze to wash over me. There was a solid minute there where I was seriously considering throwing up onto the roof. The breeze somewhat cured my nausea, though, so I just kept my head hung out of the window. It was dark outside, and the quiet was a refreshing contrast to the boisterous chaos downstairs. Sometimes all you need to restore your state of mind is a gentle breeze and some peace and quiet. Just as I was about to close the window and head back, I heard a faint noise, footsteps on the roof shingles. That didn't make any sense, though. Was I going crazy? Curious, I climbed out onto the roof. In all honesty, there was probably a 0% chance I would have done that if I had been sober. I slowly stood up and looked around. In the moonlight, I saw something terrifying. There were two masked figures with bags emerging from another window. It dawned on me, Crispin's house was being robbed. I started panicking. Should I shout? Confront them? Then a more pressing question hit me. What if they were armed? In my clumsy state of disbelief, I slipped and scuffed one of the shingles pretty loudly. One of the burglars heard it and jolted his head in my direction. Our eyes briefly met, and I froze. He nudged his partner, and the two of them quickly started making their way across the roof. Adrenaline surged through me. I couldn't let them get away. Crispin had been so welcoming, and I felt a surge of loyalty. I decided to act. I quietly followed the burglars across the roof, keeping a safe distance. They headed towards a sloping part of the roof for an easier escape. As they climbed down, I pulled out my phone to dial 911 but fumbled in my drunken state, dropping it. The phone clattered loudly, and the burglar turned sharply. "Who's there?" one of them hissed. Heart pounding, I ducked and scanned my surroundings, spotting a loose roof shingle. Without thinking, I grabbed it and hurled it towards them. It missed, but the noise startled them, causing one to lose his footing. He tumbled down the roof, crashing into the gutter before falling to the ground. The other burglar, now panicked, leaped to a neighboring tree and scrambled down. I rushed to the edge of the roof and saw the fallen burglar groaning on the ground. I needed to alert everyone. As I turned to head back, I heard sirens. Someone else must have called the cops. I stumbled back into the attic room and made my way downstairs, trying to appear calm. The party was still in full swing, oblivious to the drama outside. I found Crispin laughing and chatting with guests. "Crispin, you need to call the police. There's been a robbery." "I saw the burglar on the roof," I said. Crispin's face turned from amusement to shock. "Are you serious?" he said as he hurried to make the call. I explained what happened. The party mood shifted from celebration to concern. Apparently, one of Crispin's neighbors had coincidentally already called the police to file a noise complaint, which was an incredibly ironic turn of good fortune. When they arrived, I recounted my story, leading them to the injured burglar. The man was arrested, but his partner had fled. The party ended abruptly. People started scattering, and the lights got flipped on. I tried my best to act sober, but even after all that happened, I was still stumbling a bit. Crispin thanked me profusely, still in disbelief. As for me, I was just glad I could help despite the bizarre and terrifying circumstances. Looking back, I still can't really explain why the burglars would have chosen a house having a party to rob, but maybe they had prior knowledge of the house and knew no one would be upstairs. I figured that would be the end of the story, but fast forward a few months, and I've got quite the update. I was playing video games at Ralph's house one night when he got a call from Crispin, who invited us over for a few beers. Up until that point, I hadn't actually realized the two of them were that close. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up to Crispin's house was that the front door and every window in sight were completely different. Was I not remembering his house right? I could have sworn the windows and the front door had been white, but they were all gray and much more heavy-duty looking. Crispin waved us in, and we went down to his basement. We cracked a few beers and started playing a game of pool. To my surprise, he actually recognized me from the party and thanked me again for my trouble. What he told us was actually crazy, though. Apparently, the burglar the police caught that night refused to snitch on his partner and was currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. The police hadn't been able to get any leads into catching the other guy, though. Crispin told us that not even a week after the incident, his family started receiving threatening letters from an unknown sender, some of which included pictures of Crispin and his family members. Obviously, they reported these occurrences, but the police had no real leads. A month after that, Crispin's mom noticed a suspicious vehicle circling the house at around 1 a.m., and a few days later, Crispin's dad claimed that things in their backyard had been gone through and moved around. In response, Crispin's dad increased their home security and even went as far as to replace and reinforce all their doors and windows. I was shocked. This was still an ongoing issue for Crispin, and I had no idea how serious a situation like this could get. Summer's fast approaching, and I'm sure I'll have another update when I see Crispin again.